interpret it as meaning more than, you know, the fact that it applies to January 6 actions, that a decision. I'm trying to just see one thing and just see what they said. But in other words, it's they took this statute, and it was a novel use of this statute, but they were trying to find something that would fit with the way the January 6th rioters went into Congress and obstructed what was going on there. So they were trying to find a way to fit it, and this to them fit. But what the Supreme Court is saying is that no, this is not about that kind of a proceeding. This is more about papers and documents, and that's what Enron was about. So, you know, it's hard because I'm.
You're talking as you're reading.
I'm trying.
So
the case is going to go back to the D.C. Circuit, and then it will assess whether the indictment can still stand, the Trump indictment, in light of this new and narrower interpretation of the law. It'll be interesting to see what Justice Jackson, who is siding with the 5 conservatives here, has a concurring opinion. It'll be interesting to see why she decided to side with the conservatives. And, you know, we've seen this term that she's one of the liberal justices who has gone in different ways than the other liberal justices in different points in certain cases. And this is certainly one of them. So it's a narrow reading of this statute is what it basically is. And I think you can see today, there were all 6-3 decisions today. So, I mean, this is a court so highly divided. And, you know, at the beginning of the term, we had justices, even Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and the Chief loves to say this, you know, most of the decisions are unanimous. Well, those are unanimous because they're decisions in cases that you and the rest of the public doesn't hear about. They're technical or whatever. When it comes to these hot button social issues, when it comes to this kind of a case, things involving Trump, it's 6-3. This court is so divided, and this is exactly what they don't want to show the public, that they're divided down, you know, ideological lines for the most part.
Yeah, and June, it looks like we will see you on Monday. They're done for the day. And it looks like the Supreme Court's last opinion day will be Monday. We know what that means. Trump immunity will be coming at 10 o'clock on Monday. We will be here with June Grasso for that senior legal analyst joining us at Bloomberg. So again, we've had a lot going on, but the latest Supreme Court ruling is that they sided with the January 6th Capitol riot defendant in a ruling that could affect hundreds of prosecutions, including the criminal case in Washington against former President Trump. It now goes back to the D.C. Circuit Court to rule on whether the indictments can still stand under this new interpretation of the Enron law that is designed to help ease official proceedings, that you cannot obstruct official proceedings. That is that Enron rule. All right, let's get more here with Caroline Fredrickson, Senior Fellow at Brennan and Strategic Counselor on Democracy and Power at Open Markets Institute. Can you just walk me through what you expect to happen next?
Well, I mean, I'm just like you. I'm trying to digest what happened, but I think we're going to have a whole variety of cases that are going to be reopened for return to lower court for either dropping the charge altogether and proceeding on the other charges, or adding further evidence and qualifications to make it more pertinent to the actual connection to the destruction of evidence. And I think that's going to be obviously challenging. There are a lot of people who've been convicted already.
Caroline, to what extent are you considering this a win for Donald Trump, a positive development?
It's really hard to say on, the little that, we know, having just glanced at the head notes to try and absorb it. But he's certainly going to make it out like it's a win, and that the Justice Department has overreached, and that it continues to overreach, and it goes to his story about the vendetta that has been waged against him by an overly politicized Department of Justice. So he's going to call it a win regardless of what anybody else says. Mm-hmm. To the extent that it actually affects any case against him, we'll have to see. Again, I think the Justice Department is going to reformulate these cases. It's going to try and establish in some that they have the requisite connection to the charges that are listed. And this is an interesting case because it follows on an earlier case dealing with the destruction of a fish, actually, when some fisherman was picked up for violating laws regarding the kind of size of the fish he was pulling up, and he threw back some fish, and he was charged under this law. And the question was, is a fish a tangible object under the law? And they found, in fact, in that case, that it wasn't, that it was supposed to be related to a document and so forth. So we're sort of seeing this as of a piece with that. Kagan was in dissent in both cases, here, this one and that one, the prior case. And so I think, it'll be, she's been trying to make the argument that this otherwise word in there is a broad sweeping term that should allow anything that's connected to the obstruction of an official proceeding, that it doesn't have to be related to particularly destruction of evidence. And so, I think, will the Justice Department be able to now show that they were trying to inhibit the actual counting of the ballots and, a physical piece of evidence, a document? Maybe they will, and they may be able to, but that remains to be seen.
If they don't or they can't, then what happens with all of these defendants, including President Trump?
Well, I mean, just remember that there were multiple charges in all of these cases, and so I don't think there are probably any of them who were prosecuted simply on this particular charge. This was, I think, an additional one that allowed them to enhance these sentences. And so I think in this case, there will be a potential lessening of the sentences. Some people will be sentenced to time served, and some people, will perhaps get off altogether because their charges are so minimal that they will be a kind of slap on the wrist. So I think it'll be seen. I mean, it'll remain to be seen. There'll be a lot of different outcomes depending on the level of engagement with President Trump. He obviously had a greater involvement in all of the different back and forth between members of his campaign and a variety of people working on thwarting the counting of ballots on January 6th. They may be able to, and Jack Smith may be able to assemble a greater amount of evidence that will continue to keep these charges more relevant for Donald Trump himself.
Can we actually zoom out, and could you talk a little bit more about the 2002 law that grew out of Enron, that's kind of at the center of this decision?
Right. Well, it was interesting. In that particular situation, you had a statute that was not able to capture somebody who actually destroyed the documents and destroyed physical evidence. And instead, it went after those who were who encouraged or abetted, but it didn't actually go after the direct perpetrator. And so, what Congress tried to do is strengthen the law so that it would be broader in scope and enable the prosecution of those who'd actually been directly involved in trying to evade prosecutions. So it let the big fish, so to speak, off, and those who are less responsible could be prosecuted. So they tried to fix that, and this irony, perhaps, is that, at least according to the Supreme Court, they didn't do a very good job of it.
Yeah. Caroline, we appreciate it. Thank you for walking us through all of this. Caroline Fredrickson, Senior Fellow at Brennan and Strategic Counselor on Democracy and Power at Open Markets Institute. The Supreme Court is done for the day. They're coming back on Monday, and the Supreme Court will be issuing the Trump immunity ruling on Monday around 10 a.m. In that hour, we are going to have live coverage of that, so definitely stay tuned with us for that. Let's get a quick check here on the markets. S&P is up 0.4%, the Dow up 0.5%, the NASDAQ up by 0.4%. Taking a look at Amazon, a little lighter yesterday after ending at a record. Microsoft, though, still grinding its way higher. Apple slightly higher as well. The Mag 7 hanging in. It is the end of the second quarter, so expect a lot of liquidity as we move out through the next few hours. Coming up in the next hour, Danielle DiMartino Booth is CEO and Chief Strategist for QI Research. Her take on PCE.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. We made it to the end of the week, and a busy end of the week it is. I'm Alex Steele alongside Emily Grafeo. Paul Sweeney is off today. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. Coming up, we're going to break down all the market-moving events, plus that record high over in the NASDAQ 100, also the PCE that we got out. I call it a Rorschach test. You can kind of see what you want. Danielle DiMartino Booth will be joining us on her take for that. Also, it's a moment. Today's a moment. Joe Mysak is retiring today. It is his last day in the office. He's spent over 40 years talking about muni bonds. We're going to have our munis in focus coming up within the next hour. For now, let's get you updated here on everything you need to know in BizFlash. Here is Charlie Pellet. Charlie?
Thank you very much, Alex Steele. We are looking at records for the S&P 500 index. Right now, closing at 5503, up 0.4%. And we will find out just where it closes today. 4 p.m. Wall Street time. We have got the Dow Industrials up 147 now, up 0.4%. NASDAQ pushing higher, up 58, gain there of 0.3%. NASDAQ 100 continues to advance, up another 81 points now, up by 0.4%. Traders sending stocks toward records as signs of inflation cooling, reinforced bets that the Fed will be able to start cutting rates this year. 10-year right now, 4.33% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.71%. Gold, a lower little change, down 0.1% right now. Spot gold, $23.25 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down now by 0.4%, $81.41 for a barrel of WTI. Well, as for the economic backdrop, Torsten Slok is chief economist at Apollo Management.
We're not seeing the economy fall apart. It is just the case that a lot of the incoming data just still continues to point to an economy that has two tailwinds from easy fiscal conditions, meaning we still have support from the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Act, and Infrastructure Act, and we also still have easy financial conditions providing a tailwind. So overall, we still see steady growth for the next several quarters.
Torsten Slok of Apollo Management. Again, 10-year at 4.32%, the 2-year 4.71%. Cannot ignore Nike today after earnings. The stock plunging 19.2% after the world's largest sportswear company's full-year outlook missed expectations. Again, Nike now lower by 19.2%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 16, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so very much. So, Emily, was this all that you desired and more, an hour of Supreme Court rulings when you co-anchored radio with me?
You know, there was a point in my life where I thought I was going to go to law school.
Oh, okay.
I interned at a law firm before I interned at Bloomberg News.
That's so exciting.
And I chose news.
You chose news. So you didn't like it at all, or it just wasn't for you?
I have to be honest, every lawyer that I got coffee with at the firm was like, why are you here? Why do you want to go to law school? And that kind of scared me off.
Fair enough. I used to work at a law firm, too, at night.
Okay.
So there was a lot of photocopying, page checking. You know what I'm thinking about. All right. Let's get back to these Supreme Court decisions here. Greg Storr is Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter and joins us. The two big ones that we're following here at Bloomberg is the Supreme Court backing the January 6th defendant, curbing the use of the Enron law, plus the Supreme Court overturning the Chevron rule in a big blow to agency power. That power goes to the judges to interpret laws from Congress. Greg, what are your takeaways? Walk me through what we know so far.
Well, the Chevron ruling is huge. It was largely expected based on what we heard in the arguments earlier this year. The court really put in place now a sea change in the way regulations are going to be evaluated by courts. No longer will they defer to agencies if a statute that they're interpreting is ambiguous. Instead, it's the judge's job to say what that statute means, how much power an agency has, and that's really going to reverberate across the federal government.
What does this mean for Wall Street versus the SEC?
So for Wall Street and for any businesses, big or small, that are subject to regulation, it basically means it's going to be harder for regulators to put things in place, and that can be good or bad. It may limit the ability of agencies to deal with emerging issues, including things like climate change, AI, things where Congress hasn't passed a statute that is really explicit about, hey, agency, here's what you can do to address this problem. On the other hand, for those who say that government regulates too much, it may ease some of that burden, may make it easier for businesses and business groups to overturn regulations they find oppressive.
Does this stand in the way or help M&A at all? And I just say that because I feel like, just in talking to a lot of people, say in the energy industry, like people want to merge, they want to do the M&A, but they're waiting until after November, or they're getting in the queue, but it's just been really hard to get deals done. Do we know how backing away from the Chevron deference will change that?
That's really hard to say. Antitrust law is, so focused on some, old and vague statutes, and a lot of judicial case law that has built up over the years about how to interpret those laws. I am not aware of any cases in the pipeline right now that say agencies have less authority than we once thought they did. But that could change, and there may well be cases I don't know about. I am quite confident, I'll say this, that there are a lot of lawyers out there who are looking for a lot of new ways to challenge things because of this decision.
Oh, yeah.
So 2 of the decisions that we got were 6-3. What do you make of that, Greg? What is that supposed to mean about the Supreme Court in the U.S. right now?
Well, wait till I tell you what the 6-3 is in the other case. So the Chevron case we've just been talking about, that's the 6-3 we're kind of expecting, the 6 conservatives on one side, the 3 liberals on the other. The second case that I think that you mentioned at the top involving the January 6th defendant, that was also 6-3, but in that case, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson joined the majority, a liberal justice joined the majority, and Amy Coney Barrett, a conservative justice, joined the dissenters. So I'm still diving into that ruling, but there is a huge, certainly big picture, big ideological divide in this court. It corresponds with which party appointed the justices, but there are occasional exceptions to that, as we see in the January 6th case.
All right. Hey, Greg, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Greg Storr, joining us, Supreme Court reporter, and reminder that Supreme Court's done for the day, which means that Monday we will be getting the Trump immunity case. So stick with us for that. Okay, the market's still on the move. It is the end of the second quarter. It is the first half of the year. You get Russell 2000 rebalancing. There's stuff going on. There's individual movers as well. Abigail Doolittle joins us here. All right, Abby, what is a stock that you're watching right now?
So there are a few. We have NVIDIA now down on the week. It's higher on the day, up 1.2%, but down on the week. That's one reason that we have the stocks down for a second week in a row. But Nike, now at session lows, heading to the worst day ever, going back to 1980. That, of course, on that roughly 2% sales miss for the quarter that was. Looking ahead to this new fiscal year, analysts had been expecting sales growth of 2%. The company Dow talking about a decline of mid-single digits. So that's, really a pretty big miss. In terms of the last quarter, it had to do with weakness around Converse and Jordan, their lifestyle brands. The question is, can they really revamp their products, especially around the running shoes, to compete in all areas? Because Emily, you were making the case earlier about the little black Adidas shoe that so many folks here in New York wear, although Alex and I didn't even know about
Although
it.
now that you said it, I Googled them. I'm like,
yeah,
now
okay,
you recognize.
right,
I get
exactly.
you.
So those are some of the stocks that I'm watching at this point. But I think that the stocks, if it does close down for a second week in a row, that's kind of interesting only because it contrasts with a super strong start to the year for not just the stocks, but the S&P 500 up about 15% in the first half after gaining nearly 25% last year. So the bulls are in charge, but there's so many bearish divergences beneath the surface. It's going to be interesting to see how long it all lasts.
Yeah, especially with both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ 100 touching record highs this year.
It is interesting.
Not this year, today.
But what's also interesting is I wouldn't be surprised if we see a reversal soon, because the S&P 500 at the highs up 0.6%. I'm really glad you're reminding me of this, Emily. A new record high at that point, now up about 0.2%. The NASDAQ 100, this is really interesting. At the highs up 1.6%, now up just 0.3%. And I think a lot of this has to do with probably NVIDIA. Let me just take a quick look at the intraday intraday direction here for NVIDIA. And yeah, so it is well off of its highs, up more than 2% now, up 1.3%. And I'm going to just do a quick index move function on the Bloomberg terminal to see what else is dragging, because that's really a big move lower. So you have Amazon down 1%, you have Meta down, Google down, Netflix, so lots of these big names. But I think the biggest thing is NVIDIA. It had been up again more than 2%, and now it's really pairing those gains, taking the index with it.
All right. And a reversal in yields, too. We saw yields lower, and now they're all higher across the Treasury curve.
Yeah.
Yep, that's also interesting.
Great point.
I wonder when that happened.
Maybe we'll ask Danielle.
Yeah, that's a great setup. Look at that. All right, Abby, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Abigail Doodle is joining us there. All right, let's get to what's happening in the bond market. You're right. Yields have moved higher despite the fact we got that PCE that seemed to be interpreted as, okay, the Fed can cut. It's okay. Inflation is coming down. Spending and income is hanging in okay. Danielle DiMartino Booth is CEO and Chief Strategist for QI Research. Hey, what was your interpretation, Danielle, about the data and then what we're seeing in the bond market right now?
So, thanks for having me this morning. It's great to be with you again. And this is a real head scratcher for me. Unrounded 0.08% increase in the core. The Fed's year-end target is 2.8% for the core PCE. It's down to 2.6%. Same with its unemployment target for the end of the year, 4.0%. That's where the unemployment rate is right now. So it would seem to be, a green light for the Fed to cut rates here. And we had University of Michigan see an appreciable decline in inflation expectations in both the short and long term. So go figure on why bond yields are up. That's my honest answer here.
So what about when you look to the rest of the year? We're just at the halfway mark. What do you really see is going to be driving the cross-asset market action?
So, there's a real tug of war. There are a lot of good observations being made right now about the K-shaped economy, the haves and the have-nots. You see that when you get the second print for the University of Michigan and that you get terciles of income broken out. And you see that there's a lot of anxiety among the lowest income earners. We've got an institutional client at QI who was saying that a Tampa food bank has gone from 20,000 to 40,000 per month households that it's serving, that a lot of these nonprofits are just overwhelmed with the amount of demand. As we're seeing, again, the difference between 2023 and 2024 is 2023 were really white collar layoffs, 6 to 9 months of severance. And then you hear from the likes of Walgreens yesterday, up to maybe 60,000 jobs in peril there with all of those stores closing. These types of job cuts, the people who lose their jobs only get 6 to 9 weeks of severance. So it's a huge difference.
So fair enough. Okay, so if we just sort of go with yields are doing stuff, we're end of the second quarter, so things are moving, et cetera. Do you think the data that we got today can greenlight a cut from the Fed, and when do you think that could be greenlit?
I do. We have seen revisions out of the state of California that show that net job losses through the second half of 2023, the last 6 months of 23 were negative. We're going to get several revisions out of the Census Bureau for payrolls before even the July Fed meeting, and certainly a very large one in August before the September meeting. So I'm looking at September as the definitive launch date for Fed rate cuts.
Does the equity market need a rate cut in September? Because here we are, we're at all-time highs today, and we still have, yields moving a little bit higher, but I'm just wondering if we don't get that cut, maybe it's pushed out even further, maybe into 2025. Does it tank stocks, you think, or are we able to kind of stay here at these all-time highs and continue chugging along for the rest of the year?
I think the stock market does hang in there. Historically speaking, until the Fed actually cuts rates, stocks are very well behaved. It's only after the Fed actually makes that rate cut, no jawboning, no quantitative tightening or quantitative easing, but actual rate cuts that start, then you see stocks correct. Then you see stocks decline. And that's, again, historically back in the post-war era, how the script has played out.
Hey, Danielle, walk us through what you're expecting for jobs Friday next week. So we get the PCE. It seems to be okay. The inflation story seems to be adjusting, right? That super core is coming down. The data this week was very lumpy, not great, particularly when it comes to housing. You heard Mary Daly talking about worries about growth, for example, and we had also worries about, are we actually restrictive enough? And if we're not, then that could really spur more growth issues. What reflection do you think we're going to get in that in the jobs number next week?
So I would be surprised just on a pure data basis if we didn't see a little bit more weakness at the margin in the jobs data. The survey week for non-farm payrolls did see an uptick in both initial and continuing claims in that survey week rising to the highest since 2021. And that is when the survey data are collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I would expect to see this weakness. Again, a lot of the layoffs we're seeing, the reason we're seeing the 4-week moving average and initial jobless claims steadily march upward over the last few months is because the people who are losing their jobs get a very short period of pay from their former employer before they're filing that initial jobless claim. We're seeing that very steadily rise this year.
So that's the macro. I want to go super micro maybe, and we don't have that much time left, Danielle, but what do you make of the volatility in these pet stocks after Roaring Kitty comes on Twitter, he posts a picture of a dog? I mean, just talk about, what does this tell you about the market that we're in, that we're still seeing? He didn't even mention Petco, and yet the stock kind of went crazy after his tweet.
So again, I think this goes back to the point that I made earlier, and that would be one that we have not seen any capitulation in this stock market. The fervor to speculate is still very much alive, what we call animal spirits. It's still out there. People are still ready to gamble on the stock market as if the pandemic just hit the shores. So it again shows you that there's a great big willingness to take risk.
Well said. Emily's quoting you right now for an article. She was very excited to ask you that question. Yeah, and then it's too much liquidity. It's a lot of liquidity out there, even if that upside didn't continue into today. All right, Danielle, we really appreciate Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist for QI Research, joining us there. Coming up next, it's an historic moment. Do not miss it. Joe Misek, editor of the Bloomberg Brief Municipal Market, will be joining us to talk about muni bond market, but he's also retiring after decades in the market. It's a moment. He spends his last day with us. I don't know what to say about that. I got to say, if I was retiring, I don't think I'd be spending it with you guys. Looking at a market that still is holding on to some of its gains, although we are well off the highs. As yields really pop higher. Second quarter, Russell 2000 rebalancing, liquidity event as we head into the close. That's really the narrative right now in the market, and that volume picking up as well. This is Bloomberg Intelligence. Happy Friday.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We got gains for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. A lot of green on the screen, right to the numbers. We got the S&P 5,500 and a decimal right now, up 17 points, up 0.3%. Could see a record close today on the S&P. The Dow up 110 right now, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 58, a gain there of 0.3%. 10-year 4.32% with a 2-year 4.70%. Spot gold down $1 the ounce to $23.26. Little change there. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 81.46 a barrel. The Fed's preferred measure of underlying inflation decelerated. Household spending rebounded, and income showed solid growth. As for the overall inflation backdrop and the Federal Reserve, Danielle DiMartino Booth is CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research. She was interviewed moments ago right here on Bloomberg Intelligence.
The Fed's year-end target is 2.8% for the core PCE. It's down to 2.6%. Same with its unemployment target for the end of the year, 4.0%. That's where the unemployment rate is right now. So it would seem to be, a green light for the Fed to cut rates here. And we had University of Michigan see an appreciable decline in inflation expectations in both the short and long terms.
Danielle DiMartino Booth of QI Research. Again, the 10-year 4.33%, the 2-year 4.70%. Nike after earnings down now by just about 19.3%. Recapping, S&P up 18, up 0.3. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Now on Bloomberg Intelligence, Munis in Focus. For the final time, here's Joe Mysak.
All right, the Focus on Munis is brought to you by Build America Mutual, insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of Building America. Invest in BAM insured bonds. And I loved that intro because it is true. Joe Mysak, the Muni man himself, is retiring today, and I can't believe he's not phoning it in, but he's here, he's in studio, and he's excited to talk about munis. Joe Mysak, editor, Bloomberg Brief for Municipal Market.
No phoning it in.
No, you are here in studio. Paul will be impressed, but he's sunning himself on the beach right now. Joe, you made it. How do you feel today?
Great.
Great. What are you going to do on Monday?
I kind of planned it out. I think I'm gonna go to a diner and have bacon and eggs and read the newspaper at 9 a.m.
Okay. Are you only going to read about munis, or are you going to expand?
At that late hour, can you imagine?
No, actually, I literally cannot.
9 a.m.
Anyway, you will be very missed, and we will probably call you on your phone every once in a while. And we don't want to detract from your expertise in munis either. What's the big issue in the market as you depart?
Well, all the bankers are very happy so far this year because we've had, I think I checked it this morning, and so far we have $235.9 billion in long-term municipal bond volume. That's up almost 40% over last year's pace. And what it means, basically, is it looks like we're headed toward a record year. I think the previous record was something like $458 billion. So we could very well be headed toward a $475, maybe even a $500 billion year, especially if you get a little interest rate cut and yields start to subside a bit. You'll see even more refunding volume than we've seen so far, and we've seen some. So the big issue in the market right now is supply, and the states and localities just keep coming to market, and they're finding very good reception for all their deals.
So that compares to when you started. Long-term muni bond sales totaled only $46 billion, Joe. Talk to us about the evolution of this market that you have had the privilege to cover for so long, and
43 years.
Where we go from here.
Wow. The market is I want to say it's, how has it grown up? I mean, it's difficult to say the market's grown up because, you started having the tax exemption in 1913. But the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board was established in 1975. So I started in January of 1981, and beginning around then, the MSRB, the self-regulatory organization, started putting together new rules, including bans on pay-to-play. So, for example, underwriters can't, when they solicit business from an issuer, they can't also load up all the politicians there with political campaign contributions, which was a real issue in the municipal market for many years. Pay-to-play. Jesse Unruh, the treasurer of California in his last iteration, was the one who said money is the mother's milk of politics. And, it was a very different world. What else can we say? Well, from 46 billion to almost 500 billion today. So, you've had a big increase in volume. You've also had numerous assaults on the tax exemption, and I think one of the best things to come out of all these efforts at tax reform is that the issuer community is now energized to defend the tax exemption, which is the thing that really makes the market go round.
So you don't think that that's going to be up for debate at all, whoever wins the White House in November, yeah?
Well, you have a lot of, there's a lot of things in play, but yeah, I think that almost whatever happens, you're going to have a president who's going to throw out an idea for tax reform.
Okay, because if that happens, you're coming back. just to be totally clear.
Tax reform usually involves someone suggesting that they get rid of the tax exemption, even though the savings is not all that much. But there's not a lot of places you can find savings. So yeah. Now, of course, you do need. You have to have the president, and you have to have his party holding probably the Senate and the House to get anything done. But never say never.
One thing that seems really intriguing to me about the muni bond market beat is that you get to learn and you get to write about so many fun, can I call them, topics?
Yes, you
stadiums, airports, just maybe Amtrak, yeah. Tell us a little bit about kind of the trends that you've watched recently through the lens of the muni bond market.
Wow. Well, the high yield market, the high yield muni market, early in my career, high yield bonds were sold to mom and pop investors, individual investors, which led to a certain amount of outrage on the part of the SEC because they thought this was not a good idea. Because what happens? These bonds have a higher propensity for default. And when that happens, individual investors tend to get very excitable, and they start to chat with the members of Congress. So I think one of the big things I saw was that the high yield deals are now almost all sold either on a 144A basis to sophisticated investors, or even when they're not, they're sold in very high denominations, $100,000, $250,000, $500,000, to keep the riskiest deals out of the hands of individual investors. And I think that's one of the things that's a kind of signature good thing that the market has done.
I would be remiss if I let you go without asking about the congestion pricing for the MTA. And I'm asking for a friend. His name may or may not be John Tucker. Do you think the MTA is coming to grips to this? Like, what's your crystal ball for this? As you're sitting in the diner eating your eggs.
Well, they've come to grips with it, and they, are taking an axe to their capital spending plans. But I really think that post-election, congestion pricing is coming back, and it's going to be enacted. And I think people just take a look at the traffic out there and how much it costs the city of New York and how much it costs the various drivers, and it's going to be enacted. If I had to say, it's not dead.
Joe, it has been a sincere pleasure getting to know you these last few months in this Muni moment. I think all of us at Bloomberg Radio, TV, and News will miss you greatly, and we wish you all the best of luck on this next stage of your life. And if you get lonely, come back in. Do not be shy. We will miss you, Joe Misek, of Bloomberg Editorial. He's covered the muni market for over 40 decades, and we send him off now into retirement to the diner at 9 a.m. Monday morning, reading the paper with eggs and bacon. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, in the markets, we are still looking at equities a little bit higher, but it's really about bond yields moving a lot higher as well. Not sure why, it's just happening. End of quarter, we got second quarter rebalancing, first half of the year. Coming up, Eric Balchunas of Bloomberg Intelligence, senior ETF analyst. He and Emily are going to talk about stuff around ETFs. Michael Barr, right now on World National News.
Thank you very much, Alex, Emily, Charlie. A Supreme Court ruling is backing a January 6th defendant and limits obstruction charges. Bloomberg's June Grosso.
It means that some defendants are going to have their cases trimmed back, and this also affects Donald Trump because he's been charged with this same crime. So it's going to affect a lot of January 6th cases.
Bloomberg's Law's June Grosso says the ruling was 6-3. The panel limited the Justice Department's use of a 2002 law that makes it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. The majority said the law, enacted in response to the Enron collapse, is designed to protect documents and other records. The High Court also reinstated an Oregon city's law banning public camping, issuing its first ruling on homelessness in 4 decades. The case is the most significant to come before the High Court on the issue and comes as a rising number of people in the U.S. are without a permanent place to live. A raspy-voiced President Joe Biden repeatedly sought to confront Donald Trump in last night's debate, but Biden's uneven performance brought more concerns of many Americans that at age 81, he is too old to serve as president. Meanwhile, the 78-year-old Trump's rhetoric reminded Americans of the bombast during his term. The former Uvalde school district chief has been indicted over the failed response to the Robb Elementary shooting that left 19 students and 2 teachers dead in May of 2022. Pete Arredondo was booked on 10 felony counts of child endangerment and abandonment. A second officer, Adrian Gonzalez, was also indicted on similar charges. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Final trading day of the quarter and the first half. We've got stocks pushing higher, on track for records. Traders send stocks to fresh all-time highs. The signs of a cool down in inflation reinforce bets that the Fed will be able to start cutting rates this year. Equities extending this year's rally, with the S&P now at 5503, up by 0.4%, up 19 points. The Dow right now up 134, up 0.3. NASDAQ up 60, a gain of 0.3%. 10-year 4.32%, the 2-year 4.70%. Gold up 0.1%, 23.29 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 81.40 a barrel. Economists say today's inflation data can be considered good news for now, as we hear from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation moderated in May. Core PCE posted the smallest increase in 6 months, edging up just 0.1%. That could bolster the case for a Federal Reserve rate cut later this year. And yet Bloomberg Economics is skeptical, noting the data reflect lower gasoline prices as well as a drag from durable goods. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Nokia has agreed to buy Infinera Corp in a $2.3 billion deal that will expand the company's networking products for data centers and increase its presence in the United States. Infinera up by 17.9%, Nokia up by 1.9%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P right now at 5503, up 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Emily Griffeo. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. Now, Emily endured an hour of Supreme Court rulings, which I promise you was not what she was signed up for. And at the beginning of the show, I said, what are you watching right now? And she said, ETFs. So I was like, you know what? She needs a bone. We're going to give Emily Griffeo a bone and talk to Eric Balchunas, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior ETF Analyst, which is also quite interesting, Eric, because we are at the end of the second quarter, first half of the year, and I'm just really curious, and then I'll let you guys roll with it. What are the flows like? What stands out to you, Eric?
Oh man, it's very possible ETFs break their record. Every month this year, they've taken in 20-30% above the average for a month typically. So right almost near 400 billion. But in the second half of the year, ETFs typically do better. So that 400 billion, the record's 900 billion. So we could easily see 500 billion. So we're a record pace. The other thing that my colleague Athanasios found that is in the years that SPY is up 10% in the first half, it tends to have finished of an average of 28% that year. Like in other words, the first half is very indicative of what the second half will do. Anything's possible, we know this, but that's a good sign that the stock market being up is usually good for ETF flows. It means everybody's investing. ETFs take in money in bad markets, but they take in more in bull markets. And so that's sort of where we're at. But I feel like sometimes when you get that confident, that's just when the black swan hits. So I'll go ahead and just end it there. But so far, everything looks really great. Flows going into all asset classes.
So then, I guess, is it surprising then that the equity market has been so strong, and yet we are seeing a lot of flows and a lot of, frankly, launches from issuers for these kinds of products? I know, Eric, you call them boomer candy, but covered call ETFs, buffer ETFs, essentially these kinds of candy. That was Eric's term, not mine. But these kinds of products that offer protection. What do you make of that? Does that make sense?
It does, and we just wrote about this today. There's a real problem with the 60-40 portfolio is what most normal people have, something like that, and advisors love it. There's a problem with the 40. Most people have put their money in the aggregate bond index, like AG or BND, but that ETF, that index, has failed to keep up with inflation over the last 10 years. The bull market in bonds was like 35 years long, and it ended in 2020 when the Fed raised rates. And in 2022, and this is probably even worse, the AG was down 13%. Stocks were down 19%. Back in 2008, bonds offset some of your stock losses. So investors are used to the bonds hedging their stocks. It just doesn't happen anymore. This is a big deal. This has opened the door to boomer candy, which is, hey, I'm an older investor. I want to be in the market or involved, but I just don't trust bonds anymore. So, hey, you're going to use these options to target my outcome. With customizable options, you can sort of lock into like, well, the first 5% decline I eat, but then beyond that, I don't have to worry about anything. But the cost to that is I only get 10% of the upside per year.
Right.
So you give up sort of like extreme upside to sort of save yourself from extreme downside. And boomers are more than happy to make this trade-off for the psychological calming of their nerves, which is a very valuable market right now.
So that's what boomers are investing in. Maybe
there you go. That's boomer candy, Alex. You want some?
No comment.
Maybe you want what typically younger, more retail investors buy, and that's Bitcoin. Eric,
I want neither. I'm like putting gold under my bed, guys. All right, but okay, go ahead.
We're halfway through the year, and when I look at what the ETF market has done so far, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that the launch of Bitcoin ETFs, spot Bitcoin ETFs, was just so much larger than anyone could have expected. Even within the industry, I'm not sure if the issuers thought that we were going to see billions of dollars flow in to these products. Have we plateaued in this space? Have we seen kind of all of the initial flows into these products? Or do you anticipate that we'll actually see a lot more money into spot Bitcoin ETFs for the second half of the year?
Yeah, it's hard to say short term. I think long term, I'm pretty bullish here because, I try not to complicate it. I think with Bitcoin, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Whether it's the price or the flows, it just seems like that's where we're headed. But net, as you say, 14 billion net flows is amazing for the first 5 or 6 months. That was our estimate for the first 12 months. So they've already hit our estimate in half a year. The reason I'm bullish on the Bitcoin ETFs, forget what you know about Bitcoin. I mean, there are definitely use cases to buying something that could be a store of value, digital gold. But look at, I just saw a video with Samara Cohen, who's big wig at BlackRock, talking with Jay Jacobs, who runs their thematic ETFs, doing this sort of very boomer-friendly video about Bitcoin and how excited they are. And Larry Fink's been on several interviews talking about it. Fidelity has written this thing about why Bitcoin should be in every portfolio. These massive powerhouse asset managers writing this stuff, they have massive distributions. The amount of wholesalers that are behind this is massive. So just the structure that supports the ETF and the easy access, it's hard not to be bullish long-term. Now, Bitcoin itself has to do the work. People have to feel that it is something that is important in a portfolio. I do not think, as Alex said, gold. I do not think Bitcoin is gold replacement. To me, it's like gold as a teenager. It's much too volatile right now to be the alternative. What I do see Bitcoin as is hot sauce. And there's definitely room in portfolios for hot sauce, stuff to speculate on, because people they sort of marry index funds, but they're boring. And then the hot sauce is stuff you could do to have a little fun, speculate, cure your future FOMO. So we've seen the growth of these very volatile products that people can use to speculate with. And I think crypto fits perfectly in that hot sauce bucket. It's not as big of a bucket as the core, but it's definitely a legitimate lane for long-term growth.
I mean, there was nothing I didn't love about that sentence. And that's such a good way of thinking about it. Bitcoin is hot sauce. You're not going to have a whole pot of hot sauce because that would be unpleasant. But why not a little bit? Spice it up.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And an interesting. Go ahead, Eric. I'll let you go.
Some of these crypto people, they are all Bitcoin, and that's why they're so dramatic every time the price goes up or down. Their whole mood is dictated. But the boomers and the older and the regular investors who are buying the Bitcoin ETFs, it's a 1% allocation. But interesting, that's why I think they're going to be better hodlers, long-term holders than people think, because it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Their main money is in the S&P 500. It's not in Bitcoin. So they can stomach the volatility because they have that sort of low-cost beta core. So I think that the discipline of these investors will be better than people think.
In a twisted way, the rise of these passive funds has lent itself to hot sauce and investors buying Bitcoin on the side.
I mean, I learned so much. All right, Eric, thanks a lot. We appreciate you jumping on with us. Eric Balchunas, he's Senior ETF Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He helps leads all our coverage there. All right, let's get to market. We got S&P is up by about 0.3%. NASDAQ up also 0.3%. Just wait for that end of the second quarter.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pettit. We've got Nike shares plunging now. Nike stock down 19.2% after the world's largest sportswear company's full-year outlook missed expectations, reinforcing investor concerns about waning demand and lost ground to German rival Adidas. So is this a Nike issue or a market issue? That question this morning for Poonam Goyal, senior retail analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence.
It absolutely is a Nike issue. The problem is innovation here. They pulled their foot off the pedal about a couple of years ago since the pandemic, and they really haven't brought out enough innovation to compete with the competition and to suffice customer demand. Now they're working on it, but it's going to take time, and it's going to be a painful year to watch them try to come out of this and really bring forward more innovation than their competition.
Poonam Goyal of Bloomberg Intelligence. Again, Nike lower by 19.1%. The owner of the Jordan and Converse brands sees revenue declining in the mid-single digits in the company's current fiscal year. Analysts had expected growth of about 2% this year. Apple's iPhone shipments in China rose 40% in May, continuing a recent rebound fueled by heavy discounting from major retailers in the run-up to the country's June shopping festival. Microsoft's $13 billion investment into OpenAI is set to come under added scrutiny from European Union antitrust watchdogs, who are poised to quiz rivals about the AI firm's exclusive use of Microsoft's cloud technology. Meanwhile, more Microsoft customers are learning that emails they exchanged with the software giant were hacked by a Russian group. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Emily Griffeo. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. We also keep you updated with world and national news with Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Emily, Charlie. The Supreme Court has made it harder to charge Capitol riot defendants with obstruction, a charge that also has been brought against former President Donald Trump. The justices ruled today the charge of obstructing an official proceeding must include proof that defendants tried to tamper with or destroy documents. Only some of the people who violently attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021 fall into that category. Meanwhile, the High Court also reinstated an Oregon city's law banning public camping, issuing its first ruling on homelessness in 4 decades. We get more with Bloomberg's June Grasso.
This was about whether people can be banned from sleeping outdoors on public property when there aren't enough shelters. They don't have anywhere else to go. And the Ninth Circuit had said that was cruel and unusual punishment. That's prohibited under the Eighth Amendment. The Supreme Court said, no, it's not. It fits in with the law. It's not, doesn't go as far as the Eighth Amendment.
Bloomberg's June Grasso. The Biden campaign is responding to the criticism of President Biden's debate performance in Atlanta last night. Democrats are calling it an off night. A raspy-voiced Biden repeatedly sought to confront Donald Trump, but Biden's uneven performance brought more concerns that at age 81, he is too old to serve as president. Louisiana recently made it mandatory that classrooms display the 10 Commandments. Now, the top education official in Oklahoma, Superintendent Ryan Walters, is ordering that the Bible and 10 Commandments be included in curriculum for grades 5 through 12 statewide.
Every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in the classroom.
Andrew Seidel is an attorney with Americans United for a Separation of Church and State.
The religious extremists saw the success they had with Roe versus Wade and are feeling emboldened all around the country. That is one of the reasons you're seeing this wave of Christian nationalism rising right now.
The Bible mandate would be effective immediately. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Emily, Charlie.
All right, thanks so much, Michael Barr. So here is a fun story. Well, not for the junior bankers, but for us to talk about. Catherine Doherty wrote a great piece called Junior Bankers Log 100-Hour Weeks Again, and tensions are rising. So when Paul's here, he talks about his 100-hour weeks all the time.
At Bloomberg News?
No, when he was an investment banker. But what? So were they going away? Was that the thing here?
Not necessarily. This story by Catherine Doherty talks about how it never really went away, but deal making in the world of Wall Street is picking up a little bit, and that means that these bankers have to log more hours. And you know, there was a bit of a reckoning. A few years ago, we had junior bankers start to kind of speak out about these hours. One of the reforms that was made, at least over at Jefferies, was to give the bankers a Peloton bike as almost a, here's a health and wellness apology.
That's
and this
not
article
health they
says
want.
that the Peloton bikes are now just taking in dust because the bankers don't actually have any time to use them because they're just at the office.
If you have like 5 minutes, are you going to go on the Peloton or are you going to take a nap?
Yeah.
I mean,
or get some
you're going to
food.
take a nap or get some food. Maybe that's a little bit better. Yeah, it says that, wait, where I found this piece here about Bank of America. They said that they take their health seriously, those junior bankers. And that they take it seriously. They're going to review policies, ensure they're protected. I don't know. Do you think that this makes people not go to Wall Street now?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm a relatively young person. I got to say, a lot of my friends, they want to be in tech. That's kind of the new, like, finance.
Totally.
It's more like working in tech and computer science.
And do they work 100 hours?
No, the hours are better, and that's why people like it.
You heard it. You heard it from the person who knows the things, like Adidas Sambas. Hey, Emily, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you joining me for the couple hours. The wrap stuff from Bloomberg Intelligence. Balance of Power up next.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Another good day for Donald Trump. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Supreme Court makes it more difficult to charge January 6 defendants and Trump himself with obstruction. Just as the former president enjoys the reviews basking in the glow of his first debate with Joe Biden, we'll get the latest on the Supreme Court ruling from June Grasso at Bloomberg Law in just a moment, with insights today from Leah Lippman, professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School. Then we turn to what some were calling a debacle of a debate. We'll review that with our panel, Max Burns, Democratic strategist at Third Degree Strategies, Republican strategist Lisa Camusa Miller, also along with us. We're just getting started on a busy Friday here on Bloomberg TV and radio, and we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. For that, we turn to Charlie Pellet in New York.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. No debate about it. We are on track for our fourth week of gains for the S&P 500 index. On the week, up now by 0.6% as we wrap up the quarter, the week, and the first half of the year. We've got the S&P just below 5,500 right now, still higher by 15 points at 54.98, up by about 0.3%. The Dow up 65, up 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 56, a gain right now of 0.3%. Traders sent stocks higher as signs of a cool down in inflation reinforce bets that the Fed will be able to start cutting rates this year. Right now, we have got the 10-year yielding 4.33% with the 2-year 4.70%. Gold up $2 the ounce to $23.29, up by about 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.1%, 81.64 for a barrel of WTI. So an update here: the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq all advancing. As for the election and markets, Stephen Whiting is chief investment strategist at Citigroup Private Bank.
Let's just remember that every election around the world this year has generated some sort of surprise, whether it's India or Mexico or France. Again, the composition of Congress. This is not something that we're going to ignore all the rest of what we have now to speculate on the composition of Congress post-November.
Stephen Whiting was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. We got Nike plunging now by 19.2% after the company's full-year outlook missed expectations. Trump Media and Technology Group shares initially surged, and now they are lower. DJT on the ticker, down by 5% following last night's presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump, with the latter coming away looking stronger, a topic we'll be talking about a whole lot more coming up this hour. Right here on Balance of Power. So again, recapping, S&P up 14 right now, up 0.3%. Balance of Power continues now. Lots to talk about. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Happy Friday, Charlie, and welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you're always invited to join. In fact, you really should. Go to YouTube and search Bloomberg Global News. You'll find our live stream there. You can back it up. You can pause it. You can play it in double time. That second part might not be true. We got a lot to talk about here as we're all peeking out of one eye here. Forgive anything I say in the next 2 hours of broadcasting at Bloomberg, because it was a late night for those in the political world. How do you think Joe Biden feels this morning, or Donald Trump for that matter? DEFCON 1, says David Plouffe. We're going to talk about it with our panel coming up, Lisa Camuso Miller and Max Burns. And what feels like kind of a new day on the campaign trail, and the Supreme Court adds to that. This is where we start today. Another opinion day for the Supremes, and it looks like Monday will be the last, i.e. immunity. Just put that over here for a second, because it's January 6th. We're talking about today. We got the Chevron case as well, and the outdoor camping, i.e. the homeless ruling. In this case, though, the Supreme Court backs the January 6th defendant, challenging this idea of obstruction. Obstructing an official proceeding, a law that brings us back to the good old Enron days. And there was a question about whether that paperwork-related law at the time, it was about, right, remember the paper shredder, applied to the proceeding that we call certifying an election, January 6th, because they did block that from happening. The Supreme Court siding, though, with the Capitol riot defendant in a ruling that, by the way, could affect Donald Trump here. 6-3, justices limiting the Justice Department's use of a law from 2002 makes it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. Interesting justices in this 6-3. The breakdown here is fascinating, and June Grasso joins us now, host of Bloomberg Law, on yet another opinion day. June, what's the rationale?
So the Chief Justice who wrote the majority opinion, and it says a lot when the Chief is writing the opinion, because he's the one who gets to choose who writes the opinion. So he's putting his imprimatur on this more than in another case. And they did a very narrow reading of this law, saying that what it applies to is, tampering with physical evidence. So it's really narrow. And you mentioned the interesting lineup here. The Chief was joined by four other conservatives and Justice Jackson. And we have on the other side Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor. And Amy Coney Barrett said, and this is an originalist, textualist, said the court's ignoring what Congress said here. They're just refusing to read this law the way it should be read.
Yes.
So, it's going to be interesting when we look at back at the term where Justice Jackson and Justice Amy Coney Barrett come out on things, because they seem willing to sort of switch sides more than others. And this case might affect Donald Trump, but it might not, because the special counsel has said that even with a narrow reading of the statute, he was still able to go forward with Donald Trump. But of course, it's going to become an issue then. What's new?
That's right. So what does it mean then? What does it mean then for Donald Trump in a January 6th trial if one happens?
Right. So I assume this is going to be litigated, and the special counsel is going to argue that it's different with Donald Trump because we're saying he actually obstructed the certification. He actually obstructed the documents involved in this. So I believe they'll do a better job than I just did, but they're going to argue that, and then Trump is going to argue, the opposite. Now, maybe the special counsel will just say, considering that we don't know what's going to happen on Monday, maybe he'll just say, you know what, let's drop that. Let's go forward with the other charges. Yeah. And so in order to smooth the way to, is it possible to have a trial before the election? It seems less likely than ever.
Solicitor General June Grasso with us live on Bloomberg.
Let's
look at Barrett's comments, June. The court does not dispute, this is a direct quote, the court does not dispute that Congress's joint session qualifies as an official proceeding, that the rioters delayed the proceeding, or even that Fisher's alleged conduct was part of a successful effort to forcibly halt the certification of the election results. If the ruling does not dispute that this session was an official proceeding, then I'm lost here in the way this finally broke down.
Well, to me, the dissent reads better than the majority opinion. So,
okay,
I think that she's right. I mean, you can read the law this way. And what I'm saying is that the chief took this very narrow view of the law. And, what's interesting, too, is that Amy Coney Barrett has also taken on Clarence Thomas and the way he interprets the unique way, I'll say, he interprets statutes. So it's really interesting, and we'll see what kind of effect this will have. Apparently, only about 50 of the January 6th defendants were actually just tried with this one charge, and judges have been in cases sort of loosening up the standard and saying that because they had this in mind, they've let some January 6 defendants go without jail time. And so it hasn't been used as much as we might think, even in those 50 cases. So we'll have to see how this shakes out. But it is what it is. What can I say?
Well, Monday is going to be a big morning. That's going to be immunity now. We know that, right? That will be the final opinion day. So you want to plan to meet here at noon on Monday? We're going to need you, June.
And
right.
I mean, I don't know. It's these 3 decisions today were all 6-3. 2 of them were 6-3 down ideological lines. I got to believe that the presidential immunity is also going to be 6-3, or there's going to be some, split. And remember, I always say that the most important case, the case we're waiting for, is always on the last day of the term. So, we'll see on Monday. But I think the way the cases have been going, it's looking better for Donald Trump. Because you've seen that in the last, the conservative majority has really outed in most of these cases. And also remember that that's the case. It'll be interesting to see who writes the majority opinion there, because if it's Justice Alito or Justice Thomas, they've been asked to recuse themselves from that case because of the upside down flag flying and because of actually because of both their wives. Isn't that unusual?
All right, June. We'll meet you Monday. We have a lot more to learn, and we were going to assemble our panel next year to talk about a wild night. Talk about a good morning for Trump. It was apparently a good night for him, too. The host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio. Meet you 6 p.m. as always, June Grasso. Immunity Monday. Remember that. We're going to have a big morning on Monday, 10 a.m. As we get back to the debate last night, that which Democrats are freaking out this morning and Republicans are celebrating, right or wrong. Oh, you didn't see the debate? Here's a taste of Joe Biden and Donald Trump from last night.
Making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Okay. That was about 15 minutes into the debate. It didn't get a lot better from there as we assemble our panel for their take. Max Burns is back with us, the Democratic strategist at Third Degree Strategies. It's been a while. Lisa Camusa Miller, Republican strategist, former RNC comms director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Max, I keep hearing that there's going to be a different person nominated by the Democrats to run for president in 2024. Gavin Newsom, Governor Whitmer. Are we being serious here? Or is this going to be the nominee for Democrats?
Well, I think Democrats do have a tendency to panic after bad performances like this. We saw it in 2012 when Barack Obama had a bust of a first debate against Mitt Romney, and there was a brief talk about potentially having him drop out and endorse Mark Zuckerberg. But I do think that over the next couple of weeks, this will fade. But that doesn't mean that concerns are overblown. I mean, this was a rough performance. And much like Obama's, his team is going to have to come together with President Biden and actually discuss what went wrong and see what can be course corrected here.
Lisa Camusa Miller literally drove off the road. She's pulled her car over to talk to us. Lisa, it's good to have you back. Do we call this a win for Donald Trump or simply a loss for Joe Biden?
This last night was such a gigantic disappointment for the American people, Joe. I'm not really sure where to start. But what I will say is this, is the gigantic loss for Joe Biden. I was so distracted by Joe Biden's behavior that I didn't even hear words that came out of Donald Trump's mouth. And if that's the way I consumed that debate last night, I suspect that that's very similar to the way that many, many others did as well. And as much as I respect Max's point of view about course correction, to me, that was just so far gone, and his behavior, Joe Biden lost the election last night, in my opinion.
Wow. You can weigh in on that point, Max, but I was going to ask you if you think last night's performance makes it more likely that Joe Biden debates again and makes good on this deal to debate in September to course correct, to make up for last night, or much less likely because the staff will not let him on another stage with Donald Trump again?
Well, Joe Biden has already said that he's eager to debate again in September. That's going to be an interesting situation. I personally think it was very lucky for Biden that this was taking place in June instead of September or October, because as we tend to see from debates going back to 1952, they don't necessarily move polls for very long. Usually the effect wears off in about 3 weeks. And that's going to be a blessing for Joe Biden right now, because as much as I believe what Joe Biden said up there was factual and was correct, I agree. I don't think the American people heard as much of what Joe Biden was saying, because it was such a shockingly different Biden than they're used to seeing from 2020's debates.
Yeah, well, I don't know, Max. I mean, I don't know what you chalk this up to. He spent a week at Camp David. They had nothing but time put into the preparation here. I don't know if that was a frog in his throat or if the White House is correct. He came back with some kind of a cold. Maybe they should have said that before he started talking in a way that was jarring when people heard the first words that came out of his mouth last night. But I think the question is about consistency, right? I mean, look at all the speeches at the White House. About half the time, he sounds kind of like that. It's just different when you're in a competitive debate and you're over-prepared, some people might even suggest. But what about next year? What about 4 years from now, Max? What will he sound like then?
Well, I think those raise serious questions. And in many ways, yesterday was a tale of two Joe Bidens. Because after the debate at a post-debate rally in Atlanta, Joe Biden was on stage cracking jokes. He sounded great. He was sharp. He was on point. And the one thing I was hearing from a lot of Democratic strategists and even members of Congress is, where was that Joe Biden for the 90 minutes that he was on the air in front of tens of millions of Americans? There is now, I think, a resurgence of questions internally about whether Joe Biden's team is prepping him correctly, whether this situation could have been mitigated, or whether this is just the reality of running a candidate who is 81 years old.
Do you have any answers to those questions, Lisa? What do you think?
Well, I mean, what is really sad is this is not a behavioral and it's not a performance issue. This is the fact that he is absolutely at an age where this is beyond his capability. And that is really my point of view. And you know that I'm not terribly fond of the Republican nominee either. But this in favor, this Joe is incredibly concerning. We watched a very strong Joe Biden at the State of the Union, and it's only been 3 or 4 months later, and he has clearly declined. And now we're considering the fact that he will be not declining more over the course of the next 4 years. That, to me, it's beyond the pale. There is no coming back from this. And I think the Democrats have a very, very good reason to be concerned. They are ceding the win and ceding the White House to Donald Trump if they continue to put Joe Biden on the ballot in the fall.
There's no coming back from this. Lisa, you just said Joe Biden lost the election last night. We're going to have some time for Donald Trump here, but Max, is there a world in which some sort of deal is struck? Or does that mean a Kamala Harris run for the next term? What the heck would happen?
Well, the big problem here is that the question of who is not a clear one. And the people who are calling for an open convention or Joe Biden stepping aside, severely underestimate the chaos that would cause in the party. It wouldn't just be expensive and incredibly polarizing, but it would effectively pit all of the Democratic Party's demographic groups against each other in a way that would be incredibly disabling for the party that's currently trying to promote a message of unity and a message that democracy is on the ballot here. I mean, it would create a mess that I think a lot of people are not aware of because we haven't seen a convention like that in our lifetimes.
That's for sure. Even though it's the fantasy of journalists every 4 years, no one really thought it was going to happen. Lisa, is that how this ends for Democrats in Chicago?
You know, it's hard to tell, Joe. There's a lot. I think Max is right. I think this is a lot more difficult than people understand, and it would create a tremendous amount of turmoil. But I also think, too, that it's really kind of the Democrats' fault in the first place that no one stood up and said that maybe it was time to consider someone other than Joe Biden. And I think a lot of the blame sort of comes to be laid at the feet of the people at the White House who haven't let us see the president more readily, haven't let us see him in press conferences and other events. To me, this is something that probably could have been avoided. And so now we talk about the possibility of whether or not it's draft some of the strongest Democratic governors across the country, whether it's other elected officials that are proven and younger and smarter and potentially could take on Donald Trump. With 130 some days to go, Joe, it just to me seems like it is incredibly frustrating and upsetting that we're here. And I think a lot of the blame goes to the party itself.
Well, I'll tell you what, CNN took no time and made no effort to fact check this debate in real time. And by that, I really mean the former president. Of course, they showed up later and did all of that if you decided to watch TV all night. They found that the moderators, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, allowed Donald Trump to make at least 30 false claims, and Biden to make 9, according to the post-debate CNN analysis. Max, let's talk about Donald Trump for a moment. If Joe Biden allows him to become the next president here, what did we learn about Donald Trump last night? He was saying things, he was taking credit for things that Joe Biden did, he was saying things that were patently false.
Yep.
What can Democrats do to blunt that approach, because it didn't work last night?
Well, I think we've learned that as the American electorate has changed a lot since 2020, Donald Trump really hasn't. This was essentially Trump playing his greatest hits of grievance, making up false claims about how Mexicans have stolen the moon. And what was so shocking to me was looking at people like Jake Tapper, who offered no pushback. At one point, especially jarring, was Joe Biden asking Donald Trump to condemn the Proud Boys for their violence on January 6th. Trump ignored him, of course, but then Jake Tapper didn't feel that that very consequential question even merited a cursory follow-up. So whatever CNN was trying to do at this debate, it was certainly not any kind of journalistically rigorous attempt to learn what these candidates actually believe.
We can criticize the moderators all night here, but how about the candidate, the presumptive nominee for your party, Lisa? How dangerous do you see Donald Trump as being for the future of the GOP?
Oh, I mean, you know how I feel about this. It's tremendously dangerous, and it is the kind of thing that even my smartest Republican friends who don't necessarily agree with Donald Trump are saying they fundamentally cannot pull the lever or make the choice for Joe Biden, that they are going to hold their nose. This is the phrasing that I'm hearing from colleagues of mine, and vote for Donald Trump because they fundamentally believe in the policies that he and the people he'll put in place will enact. And so that to me is concerning, because they are willing to step aside from truth and from integrity and support a candidate that will advance policies that they agree with, in deference to another candidate who they know is not qualified and is not ready to serve for another 4 years. So to me, it's troublesome, because Donald Trump, absolutely, I think Max is absolutely on point. What he said is totally true. Donald Trump is exactly the same as he has always been. The electorate has changed, but he is not. He consistently says things that are false, and people don't care. They're willing to support him in spite of it.
What a night. This is exactly the conversation I needed today. Not that we have any idea what's going to happen, but great to hear from both of you and get inside your heads for a moment. Lisa Camusa Miller, of course, Republican strategist, former RNC comms director, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. And that's Max Burns. Don't be a stranger, Max. Democratic strategist, third-degree strategies. And great insights from both of you. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington this day after the debate, this day of another round of Supreme Court opinions. We'll have more on that next after we get a check on Wall Street. Let's look at the markets right now with the help of Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe Matthew. As we recap, reset here, we've got stocks now trading mixed, very close to records on the S&P, but back below 5,500, 54.85 right now, higher by 3 points, little changed, up less than 1/10%. Dow Industrials calling that flat on the day right now. We've got NASDAQ lower by 9, a drop right now of less than 1/10%. NASDAQ 100 index up just under 1/10%. 10-year 4.33%. The 2-year 4.71%. Spot gold is up $4 the ounce to $23.31, up 0.2%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.1%, 81.62 for a barrel of WTI. Stocks trim gains in the final stretch of a quarter that saw a strong rally fueled by bets the Federal Reserve will be starting to cut rates this year. Apple shares down 0.1%. Apple's iPhone shipments in China rose 40% in May, continuing a recent rebound fueled by heavy discounting from major retailers in the run-up to the country's June shopping festival. Again, Apple lower now by 0.2%. Nike, a major earnings story today, plunging 19.5% after the world's largest sportswear company's full-year outlook missed expectations, reinforcing investor concerns about waning global demand and lost ground to German rival Adidas. I'm Charlie Pellet in New York. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here he is, Joe Matthew.
We thank you, Charlie Pellet. Great to have you along, as always, this Friday. The Friday edition of Balance of Power. You made it to the threshold of the weekend. And if you were up half the night like half the country watching the debate last night, rest is near. The Supreme Court makes news again today. We're going to have one more day after this. This is kind of a big deal here, all right? Monday is the last opinion day, and we can tell you that officially. That came from the Chief Justice earlier today. That means the ruling on presidential immunity, which will give us a sense of whether there will be a January 6th trial for Donald Trump. That'll emerge on Monday morning, just after 10 a.m. What we did learn today is some of the charges, the obstruction, specifically the obstruction charges facing Donald Trump with regard to what happened on January 6th, along with several of the January 6th rioters, the convicted rioters, the defendants. Those obstruction charges will, in many cases, not be allowed. This will make it much more difficult for Jack Smith to charge Trump, for prosecutors to charge rioters with this idea of obstructing an official proceeding. We've talked about this before. It goes back to 2002, a law written in the age of Enron, when obstructing was shredding documents, hiding papers. In this case, obstructing an official proceeding, the certification of an election, not so much, according to the Supreme Court. 6-3 ruling, and it's where we start with Leah Littman, professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School and co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Leah, great to see you. Thank you for being with us, and I wonder what you make of this ruling, particularly how the various justices sided on this. It did not fall along so-called party lines or ideological lines. What do you make of the court's ruling?
I think it was expected from the oral argument, and while the court's decision didn't fall exactly along ideological lines, it was still 6-3, mostly along ideological lines. So you had the Chief Justice in the majority writing for himself and 4 other Republican appointees, together with Justice Jackson. And Justice Jackson actually wrote separately to further explain her vote. And then the dissent was written by Justice Barrett, and she was joined by the 2 other Democratic appointees on the court, Justices Sotomayor and Kagan. And I think what's interesting about the opinion is really 2 things. One relates to Donald Trump's case, and the other just relates to what it says about the Supreme Court. And if you read the opinion in Fisher, I think part of what is notable about it is the court is not just focusing on the text of the statute, because the text of this statute under which many January 6 defendants were convicted just says otherwise obstructing an official proceeding. It doesn't say anything about documents, records, or evidence. And instead, what the Chief Justice's majority said is, well, look, the other sections in the statute, those talk about documents and evidence. And we know that Congress was thinking about Enron when it enacted this law. So therefore, we're going to read in this kind of additional requirement that prosecutors have to show that whatever the defendant did to obstruct the proceeding involves some obstruction of records, documents, and evidence. So it's kind of interesting in that it's not very textualist, even though we think about the Republican appointees as textualist.
Well, it's funny
and then the
because Justice Barrett talks about textual backflips that were done in this opinion. Do you disagree?
No, I think she's right. And that's why I think it's interesting that Justice Jackson wrote separately, because her separate writing basically says, look, you can't resolve this case in the way the majority did just based on the text. But I am voting this way because I consider Congress's purpose in enacting the statute. And Congress's purpose was about the destruction of evidence and records. So I think both Justice Jackson and Justice Barrett are correct that the majority had to kind of do textual backflips and couldn't just rely on the text of the law in order to get them, where, as Justice Barrett said, they wanted to go because they just couldn't believe Congress meant what it said.
Fascinating. As we spend time with Leah Lippman, professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School. We've got a big one coming. The granddaddy of at least this session comes on Monday. Leah, presidential immunity. This could go a couple of different ways. Can I ask you, before you weigh in on what might happen, why the heck it has taken so long? Why does this have to go to the last day?
I mean, I think it's very puzzling, and it's in a lot of ways concerning, because the Supreme Court's delay in the Trump immunity case is further jeopardizing the prospect of a pre-election trial and pre-election verdict on the very serious election interference charges. You know, when you have a former president running for re-election and that former president is alleged to have interfered with the peaceful transition of power, I think it's pretty important to send that case to a jury before the election. And yet the Supreme Court's dilatory actions in this case have really minimized the prospect of a pre-election verdict. You know, special counsel Jack Smith originally asked the court to take the case in December. The court declined to do so and waited until February. Then it scheduled the oral argument for 2 months away. Now it's taken them, 2 months and more to reach a decision, even though it has acted much more quickly in many other cases, including the disqualification case out of Colorado about whether Donald Trump could even appear on the ballot. So I think it's very concerning. Again, another reason why it's concerning is because of the arguments Donald Trump was making. You know, those arguments were so broad and outlandish that presidents could never be subject to criminal laws. You would think it wouldn't take that much time to kind of say, whatever the scope of presidential immunity, this isn't it.
Well, okay, so if the delay is maybe political, will the ruling be?
I mean, we have to wait to see. I think in many respects, the Supreme Court has already done what Donald Trump most wanted, and that was to delay the trial in his case and to prolong the proceedings. Because when Donald Trump originally asked the court to hear this case, he asked them to schedule it for next term. Now, the Supreme Court didn't do that, but instead, by dragging it out until the end of this term and extending this term into July, which itself is quite rare, they've given him a lot of the delay that they've asked for. So even if they don't completely embrace his arguments, he already has a significant win.
That's really something. This is going to happen at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday. To what extent could it impact the outcome of the January 6th trial, if only in timing here? Will there be time, if this unlocks a trial for Jack Smith, to get this started or completed even before the election?
I think that will partially depend on the ruling that they issue. If their ruling is just a straight up, we affirm the DC Circuit's opinion, there's some possibility of a pre-election trial. Although, Judge Chutkin, the trial judge in the case, had said there would have to be 80-some days of pre-trial proceedings. And so that already pushes the trial until pretty late in the fall. If instead the Supreme Court says, well, we're not completely agreeing with the DC Circuit's opinion, we're vacating and remanding it, which means they're basically sending it back down to the lower courts to make some additional findings and perform some additional legal test, that's going to further delay the trial. And I think that makes the prospect of a pre-election trial pretty unlikely.
How about that? Fascinating. Great conversation, Leah. I'm so glad you could talk to us just a couple of hours after the rulings and ahead of what we're going to learn on Monday. Leah Lippman, University of Michigan Law School, thank you so much for the time here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We've got another panel for you. By the way, that was over a half-hour commercial-free right there on some of the most important issues that we can talk about today in Washington, and I'm really glad that we could do that. We're going to assemble our next panel next. That's the kind of day we have here. Rick Davis and Brad Howard are on the way. After we update world and national news, how about that right now with Amy Morris, a busy day in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. You bet it is. The Supreme Court siding with a January 6th Capitol riot defendant in a ruling that could affect hundreds of prosecutions, including the criminal case you were just talking about against former President Trump. Strategic Counselor on Democracy and Power at Open Markets Institute, Caroline Fredrickson, says former President Trump will try to use this ruling to his advantage.
He's going to call it a win regardless of what anybody else says. Mm-hmm. To the extent that it actually affects any case against him, we'll have to see. Again, I think the Justice Department is going to reformulate these cases. It's going to try and establish in some that they have the requisite connection to the charges that are listed.
Caroline Fredrickson speaking with Bloomberg's Alex Steele and Emily Grafeo. Voting 6-3, the justices limited the Justice Department's use of a 2002 law, making it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. The court also threw out a decades-old legal doctrine empowering federal regulators to interpret unclear laws, issuing a blockbuster ruling that constrains environmental, consumer, and financial watchdog agencies. The court also rejected a constitutional challenge to anti-camping laws, allowing cities to ban homeless people from sleeping in public spaces, even if there's no room in a shelter. President Biden's gamble, meanwhile, that a debate with Donald Trump would boost his re-election campaign, failed. New York Republican Representative Elise Stefanik.
If this is what Joe Biden, this is his performance after a week of being in debate camp, that's catastrophic for him and an embarrassment.
Still, California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom says Biden can govern.
I know Joe Biden. I know what he's accomplished in the last 3.5 years. I know what he's capable of, and I know his vision, and I have no trepidation.
Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks struggling for direction with the S&P now lower. Been that kind of a day choppy trading. S&P right now at 5478, was trading above 5,500 earlier on. Down by 5 points now, down 0.1%. The Dow lower, little change, down 6, a drop of less than 0.1%, while NASDAQ is down 58, a decline of 0.3%. 10-year yield 4.34%, the 2-year 4.72%. Spot gold flat on the day, up just 45 cents right now to 23.28. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 81.29 a barrel. Stocks are struggling for direction at the end of a quarter that saw a strong rally fueled by bets that the Fed will start cutting rates this year. Meantime, the University of Michigan is out with its latest assessment on consumer sentiment across the U.S. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Consumer Sentiment Index is published twice a month, and in late June, it eased less than a point. While financial worries persist, Americans see inflation moderating from this year's flare-up. So it could be worse. Now, there may be something to it all based on a separate inflation report from the Commerce Department. It shows core PCE, the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation, posted the smallest increase in 6 months in May. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Speaking of the consumer, Nike shares plunging after the world's largest sportswear company's full-year outlook missed expectations. Nike down now by 20.1%. Trump Media and Technology Group shares surged and then retreated following last night's presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump. Shares of DJT down now by 6.1%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Joe Matthew in Washington. This is the fastest show in politics. Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, the satellite, and YouTube, where you can find us now. Search Bloomberg Global News. Our live stream awaits, and we have a chair waiting for you here in the studio. Fat Joe is holding forth in North Carolina, waiting for Amtrak Joe. Uncle Joe, the guy you saw last night in the debate, is about to do his follow-on performance. Remember, we told you he was going to North Carolina. Raleigh is the scene, not just Fat Joe, but E40. We're keeping things young with the musicians today, or at least we're trying to, as we assemble our panel after quite a night in Atlanta. Did you watch the debate? 90 minutes. The reviews have been absolutely horrible, frankly, for both candidates. But Joe Biden is feeling the worst here after, in many cases, having a hard time regurgitating facts, frog in the throat, halting performance at times, dare I use the word freezing. He got into the heavy stuff with Donald Trump, the Stormy Daniels trial, the idea of morals being on the ballot. Here's a taste from last night.
The crimes that you are still charged with, and think of all the civil penalties you have. How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
You have the morals of an alley cat, he said. Pretty tough talk. I wonder how many people got that far into the debate. Let's bring in the panel right now. Rick Davis is still awake, by God. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, at the desk with us here in Washington. Rick, it's great to have you back. We lived through all of this together last night. Brad Howard, Democratic strategist and the founder-president, Corcoran Street Group, with us as well. A great panel here, and I can't wait to hear what both of you had to say, because, Rick, last night you were confounded by Joe Biden's performance, to an extent, Donald Trump's performance. Caught in 30 mistruths, according to CNN, which never checked any of them in real time. But this has led to a conversation about whether Joe Biden should still even be in this presidential race. Do you think that's going too far?
No, I think that has to be part of the conversation.
All right.
Thank you, White House. Test.
Okay. Well, we've got Vivek Ramaswamy coming in the loudspeakers here, guys. Is Donald Trump listening? Okay, we're clear. All right. You never know what's going to happen. Rick, take it away.
I have to break my chain of thought.
Does Joe Biden belong in this race?
Yeah, I think it's a question.
All right. Should we keep going here?
You know, I don't show up on set very often. I see the kind of challenges you must be up against.
Gee whiz. This is political interference, I think. Go ahead, Rick. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid to say anything more. Joe Biden has a question that he needs to ask himself, which is, do I really have it in the gas tank to make this run? The hard part's not even started yet, right? I mean, he went unchallenged in a primary. They completely rigged the primary rules to benefit him and not have a legitimate contender. So he wasn't tested there. The only speech he's given of any remark is the State of the Union in the last, 12 months that he did well at. And so we're all sort of getting this kind of funky comfort level.
Yeah.
You
talk about the run. What about the next 4 years?
And I think that what you have to worry about is that what if he's successful, right? As you say, I mean, 96 years old when he exits the administration, the second-year run. And look, I mean, I think there are arguments to be made after last night's performance that he cannot deliver an election. So that takes away that 4 years, right? You can't expect this to be not replicated in some fashion based on what we saw last night. Yeah. And so the question first is Joe Biden has to answer the question to himself and Joe Biden and his closest advisors. Are we really putting a product out on the field of play that, can win? And then I think the question is the party able to pivot if indeed he makes a decision, which I think would be the wise decision to take himself out of the game.
Brad Howard, I want you to pull us in off the ledge if you're ready to do that. Tell us why we should not be having this conversation. I'm being serious. Tell us why this is wrong.
Look, no, there's no wrong conversation to have in politics when you're trying to determine who you want to take on Donald Trump in November. And I think that's natural for everyone up to the moment to where you can no longer change the nominee. This discussion is going to happen. I'm old enough to remember when we all freaked out after President Obama's first debate. There's an inherent kind of learning curve around here it seems to be for the first debate for president seeking re-election. If I were them, what I hope they do is they take this debate performance and make him watch it. Because I think he'll start to understand the kind of concerns that voters have had were very evident throughout the night. I mean, he had a slow start. He came around to the end. I was proud of the several points and arguments he made, and certain times he took it to Donald Trump. But again, the only thing he had to prove that night, because everyone knows that Joe Biden is stronger on the policy. Everybody knows that Joe Biden is stronger with international affairs and holding, defending our allies. The only question mark that voters seem to have compared to Donald Trump is age. And he had to assure those concerns, and he didn't do it last night. And in fact, he made them worse. And so I think from now on, the president's camp have to make two decisions. Number one, he has a record to run on. It's a solid record that makes me proud to be a Democrat. And so can you win on just the record and on the issues? Or do you need to look, and is age going to be so prohibitive, there's nothing you can do about it, that maybe it's time to let someone stand up and run? But I don't think we all need to freak out because Obama had a similar disastrous performance and he went to beat Mitt Romney, that cycle. So, context is everything. The election is 4 or 5 months away. Undecided voters probably didn't even know there was a debate last night. They're going to pay attention in October because they're living their lives. So I think we've got time to figure this out.
We're going to be hearing Joe Biden in just a moment. It's going to be really interesting to see where his voice is, what his posture is like. Today, if you're with us on YouTube, you can see a live shot of the staging here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where Joe Biden is going to emerge in a bit here. We got a big opening from Fat Joe today, which goes along with what we've seen from this campaign. It's just a question of which Joe Biden we're going to get, Rick, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? It's consistency. You've gone through the gauntlet here with a candidate before. You could always pretty much count on who was going to show up at the event. Can Joe Biden's staff?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, inconsistency is a crutch in and of itself, right? I mean, so let's say he sounds great today. Right. When's the next time he has another debate performance like this, or walks out and does a press conference, which he doesn't do very many of, which is a problem for him because he can't just walk out and address the press because we don't know what we're going to get. Inconsistency is a death nail in politics. You have to be able to deliver that product every single day, every single minute of that day. And when you're doing 2 or 3 events a day, like what you will be doing in September and October, you've got to have someone who can withstand it. You can't have someone who tires easily. Donald Trump's going to put up a fight. I mean, what we saw last night was a guy who feels like he can win, Donald Trump, and he's willing to say and do anything. So on its own, it is a very difficult candidate to beat, because when you're willing to say and do anything, whether it makes any sense or whether it has any fact and truth at all, you're going to be hard to wrangle with. And so you need someone agile enough to be the one who corrects the record. Joe Biden could not push back on Donald Trump last night because he himself couldn't articulate the Democrats' position on abortion. How does a trade war affect inflation? He could not articulate the problems with the things that Donald Trump was saying. And so unless you're able to carry that message to Trump, and I don't disagree with Brad Howard that there's a record that he has to run on and a set of policies that the Democrats have that they want to prosecute in this campaign, but they need someone who can actually do that. And he proved last night that on one of the most important nights of the election, maybe of modern political history, he couldn't deliver.
You know, Brad, it's something we were talking up until this debate about Donald Trump's inconsistencies and his inability to stay on message when he was on the stump. The Hannibal Lecter stuff, the sharks in the water with the electric boat. It was getting to be a little bit loony at the podium. Now no one's talking about that because of what happened last night. Is that the biggest failing out of this whole debate?
Well, I always find it ironic when Republicans preach that our candidate should be disciplined when theirs is anything but discipline. And in fact, I remember when Trump was president, they stopped doing White House press briefings altogether because they couldn't even come up with a coherent message that Donald Trump could stick to. And the press secretary was saying things that were different from the president and what he was tweeting, and it was a disaster. In the middle of a pandemic, it caused a lot of confusion and a lot of lives were lost because of the chaos. And so let's not completely dismiss just how incoherent sometimes Donald Trump is, and he's getting worse. Like, we're talking about Joe Biden's physical capacity here to be president, but we should be talking about Donald Trump's mental capacity to be president. You've got yes, he is loud. He was louder than President Biden, but he was also lying out of his teeth, lying through his teeth every step of the way and saying things that didn't make sense, that weren't connected to reality. And so we're essentially having a debate here between a loud-spoken, morally bankrupt liar versus a soft-spoken, good, decent human being who's run a capable government for 4 years. And with that decision, I'd take Joe Biden any day of the week.
Is there a short list today, seriously, Brad, about who else it may be? Because Democrats don't seem to think Kamala Harris can beat Donald Trump. Who else would you look to?
Well, I'll say this, that Joe Biden is our nominee. He's going to be our nominee. Like, Democrats need to
You do believe
stop.
that?
Yes, absolutely. I think he's going to be our nominee. The only person who can decide not that is Joe Biden. But he's committed to this race. He's committed to defeating Donald Trump again. And he's got a record to run on. And he's presenting a vision for the future. We do have a strong bench in the Democratic Party. I mean, that's no denying that. Kamala Harris, I think you saw her TV appearances last night, did the president a big solid and was his fiercest defender. And I thought she did a great job reminding Democrats of what's at stake here. That, yes, the president got a slow start, but you judge him on the last 3.5 years versus Donald Trump's chaotic 4 years and what's at stake when we talk about the Supreme Court and reproductive rights. And so, but we've got a great bench of governors. You've got Gavin Newsom in California, Gretchen Whitmer in Wisconsin, J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. You've got a great, qualified, competent cabinet. Pete Buttigieg at DOT and Gina Raimondo at Commerce are some of my personal favorites. But again, that's the conversation we're going to have in 4.5 years, not right now.
We're preparing to hear from Joe Biden. Just a minute left here in this part of our conversation, Rick. If you're with us on YouTube, you see a very wound-up crowd behind a podium waiting for him in North Carolina. What would you tell your candidate to say? Do you acknowledge some of your weaknesses from last night?
It was, first of all, I was shocked that he didn't try to actually acknowledge the elephant in the room, which was his age, right? In the past, he's used some quips and things like that. No jokes last night, no humor whatsoever, no effort to try and reassure the American public that age was not a factor. And so, number one, I was shocked that they didn't actually have that baked into the equation. He had plenty of opportunities to do it. Two, he has to address this. I mean, even though Brad, I think, does a good articulate job of saying, why Joe Biden needs to stay in the race, The rest of the Democratic Party is having a conversation this morning, forget the rest of the world, about whether or not Joe Biden can manage.
Well, we're going to have more time on this, and we're going to bring you to Raleigh, North Carolina in our second hour coming up next year on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next. And as I mentioned, our panel stays with us. Rick Davis, Brad Howard, with much more to follow here on this day after the debate. This is Bloomberg.
politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The president is about to speak. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Joe Biden returns to the campaign trail this day after a challenged performance in his first debate with Donald Trump in Atlanta. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. And Kaylee, the president is hearing intense criticism and even in some cases calls to drop out of the race, calls that are coming from inside the House.
Yeah, this is members of both the Democrat and Republican Party who, in the aftermath of the debate, are questioning Joe Biden's ability to carry on as the Democratic nominee, keeping in mind that this debate happened so early in June before Donald Trump or Joe Biden are the official party nominees. The conventions have not yet taken place. And after the events of last night and the at times halting and difficult performance that Joe Biden put up, there is an open question as to what exactly is going to go down in Chicago in August.
And even today in Raleigh, North Carolina, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, you see live shots from the podium as we prepare to hear from Joe Biden for the first time since Atlanta last night. A frog in his throat at best, I guess a cold at worst. I'm not sure what we heard exactly there, Kaylee, but we brought special coverage of the CNN presidential debate last evening here on Bloomberg. People were struck by his inability in some cases to articulate numbers and ideas and halting performance. He even froze up at one moment pretty early in the debate. If you want to hear a taste of that right now, here's Joe Biden from Atlanta last night.
Strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Donald Trump took the ball and ran with that, Kaylee. That was the moment last night where people, in some cases, started to tune out. In other cases, expressed deep concern about what was going on. Democrats, namely.
Yeah, and it happened very early on. We were not 15 minutes into the debate when certainly social media started to become in a tizzy. And of course, Biden's inability at times to articulate his message, to properly state his own policy positions and facts of his administration kind of overshadowed the fact that Donald Trump, for his part, told a litany of falsehoods, misstating facts of his own, lying and not being checked by the moderators on CNN, but not being effectively checked by Joe Biden either.
They did decide to do that after the fact, by the way. The moderators allowed Donald Trump to make at least 30 false claims and Biden to make 9, according to the post-debate analysis on CNN. Look, when he comes out, we're going to bring you live to North Carolina. Everyone is wondering how Joe Biden is sounding and is feeling today, what his posture will be at this event where they're really trying to wind up the crowd, Kaylee. But we have a chance to talk to Steve Dupree, the owner of Dupree Companies, the former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party, who we've stayed in touch with since the New Hampshire primary, was formerly backing Nikki Haley on the campaign trail. And as we wake up this morning to a world that feels a bit different and more assured, according to some, for Donald Trump, we wanted to talk to Steve about the way this is going. Mr. Dupree, welcome back. It's great to see you on Bloomberg TV and radio. I wonder what was going through your mind as you were watching this last night, or how you felt this morning, if you feel like Donald Trump is closer to the White House.
Well, watching it last night was discouraging on both fronts. On the one hand, we have a former president who's a convicted felon, faces more felony charges, who has 40 out of 45 or some number of senior cabinet level of people in his past administration who won't endorse him, telling falsehoods left and right. And on the other hand, we have a president who's conducted himself honorably, restored relations with allies, handled the Ukraine and the China situations well, but clearly did not show the kind of mental acuity that's expected of a president. I mean, I think it was the worst debate performance, certainly in the history of televised debates. And President Biden had one task, which was to show that he's up for the job, and he failed last night. You know, I think it's a direct byproduct, which happens in every administration where they protect the incumbent. Had President Biden been subjected to a somewhat of a primary challenge, been in New Hampshire or some other places, either he would have been sharper or the Democratic Party would have realized that they had a challenge.
Well, and now there is much speculation this morning, Steve, as to whether or not the Democratic Party, or at least key figureheads within it, including the First Lady, Jill Biden, are going to begin to press Joe Biden to consider leaving this race and allowing someone else to become the official nominee. For Donald Trump, though, does he need Joe Biden to be the nominee to win this thing?
Well, I think certainly, notwithstanding the fact that he has all of that baggage and he had all those 30 plus false statements, he came across as vigorous, as animated, as in good mental and physical shape, and the contrast was disheartening, certainly for Democrats, but disheartening for every American, regardless of who you support. So I think it obviously President Biden would be a strong candidate, notwithstanding last night, just from what we've seen in the polls. But if it opens up and there were a new nominee, who knows who that person could be and whether they could mount the kind of campaign you'd needed. But certainly last night's debate gave President Trump a clear win, and it'll be very interesting to see the polls over the next few days, which were showing a tightening of the race, whether that remains the same.
You've been at this for a minute, Steve. You know what it's like to be a delegate at a convention. You don't buy this talk of a contested convention, right? This is fantasy for journalists, isn't it?
Generally, it is. But certainly if there ever were a case where somebody stepped down and you had an open convention, this might be it. It really depends on whether the Democratic Party stays behind President Biden, which it seems they're doing right now, or whether they start to move away from him. And frankly, I think you're going to see a lot of the Democratic operatives watching the poll numbers over the next few days and seeing if the results of the primary, the debate rather, start to make these polls go away.
Well, here at Bloomberg, obviously, we do like to look at the data and look at the polling data, but we also like to look at the financial data on fundraising. After for 2 months in a row in April and May, the Biden and the DNC effort was outraised by Donald Trump and the RNC. Interestingly, though, based on the data we're getting from the campaigns today, the Biden campaign says yesterday and part of today it raised $14 million. Donald Trump's campaign says it raised $8 million after the debate. Is that telling to you in some way, Steve?
No, I don't think so, because President Trump had 2 incredible months and virtually erased a large part of the gap between the two. So I don't think this overnight fundraising. I think people loyal to the president decided they better pony up and show their support. So I don't read a lot into that. I really do think, though, polling over the next few days will show whether President Biden maintains the level of support in what looked to be a closing race, or whether it starts to fall away. And there's nothing that will increase the chatter more to try to get him to step down than the polls diverging substantially over the next week.
We talked to Governor Chris Sununu just a couple of days ago. Steve talked about his evolution and why he plans to vote for Donald Trump. How many former Nikki Haley supporters plan to do the same, following Chris Sununu in that direction in the state of New Hampshire?
I think a fair number of them will. I mean, Chris Sununu has said, look, I disagree with President Trump in the way he conducts himself. I don't like how erratic he is and how he's treated our allies, but the Republican administration has more to it than just a president, and he thinks that more can be accomplished there. So I do think some number of those will come over. But if this race stays close, and if the result of this debate doesn't worsen the poll numbers for President Biden, some percentage of those people in the 5 contested states will make the difference.
All right, Steve Dupree, owner of Dupree Companies, former chair of the New Hampshire Republican Party. Thank you so much. Now, we are looking live at Raleigh, North Carolina, where Joe Biden has just walked up to the stage along with the First Lady, Jill Biden, who is at the podium now, Joe. Of course, Jill Biden yesterday at the end of the debate went up to Joe Biden at the podium, helped escort him off the stage toward the moderators, and of course appeared with the president after last night's activities, a campaign appearance, went to Waffle House as well. And many in Washington are pointing out that if there is a real conversation to be had about Joe Biden leaving the race, the First Lady is going to be a massive influence on that decision.
I think anyone who endured that debate and stayed up till midnight last night deserves some Waffle House, I have to be honest with you, Kaylee. But that's correct. And we could have a moment here while Jill Biden warms up the crowd for Joe Biden. But that moment he had at the fundraiser following the debate had a lot of people scratching their head because they said, where was that Joe Biden? He was in full voice. He seemed to be energetic only an hour after he left the debate stage. So we're just very curious which Joe Biden we're going to see here, if it was the one at the debate or the one at the fundraiser.
Yeah, well, we're going to hear from him, assumedly, in a few minutes after the First Lady speaks. While we do await the president's remarks, we want to bring in now our political panel. Rick Davis is here with us in studio, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, together today with Brad Howard, Democratic strategist and Corcoran Street Group founder. And President Brad, as the Democrat, I will first begin with you. What does Joe Biden need to do in these remarks? And does acknowledging a poor debate performance need to be included?
Yes, I mean, he's got to acknowledge and I think find a way to both admit he didn't have a great night while also assuring voters' concerns about his age. But let's be clear about the audience he's got to focus on. Again, swing voters aren't really paying attention. They're a small but important slice of the electorate as we head into November. They'll start paying attention around after Labor Day. Right now, he's got to stop the bleeding with the base of his own party. The people that are going to, work the phones and knock on the doors and turn out. These are the people that were most. I think it comes from a place of pain in the sense that, like, we love this man. He's a good man. He's a decent human being. He's had an incredible 3.5 years, and it pains us to see that he had a bad night. And so I think he's got to assure us that he's going to do everything he can to make sure that it doesn't happen again, that he's going to take the fight to Donald Trump. We want to see more of the State of the Union Joe Biden than last night. Joe Biden, even the after party after the debate, where he was in front of a crowd rallying them after the debate, that was a lot of energy. Like, where was that Joe Biden 2 hours before? And so he's got to spend the next weeks really assuring voters, or the Democratic base, of these concerns, or this question about whether he should be the nominee is going to haunt him all the way to Chicago.
Rick Davis, what does it say here at the end of June, where this president is apparently going to come out and tell everybody that he's still running for president? He's staying in the race. If he has to make that point today, where are we 5 months from now?
Yeah, well, depends on his performance. He's been inconsistent all year long. This is not just a one-off thing. We wouldn't be talking about this if, in this degree, if this had been the only occasion that he'd shown some infirmity due to his age. Age was the issue going into this debate, and he leaned right into that. And so this is something that has to be addressed every single day. Every time he appears in public, everything he does is now got to be geared towards showing people that the age issue is not going to be dragging the ticket down. And the reality is, the way you have to do that is to be out there swinging at the fences. And that means he has to be talking to the press off the cuff. He has to be accessible to voters. He can't be in this isolation tank that he's been in for the last 6 months, where the only time we hear from him in public is off of a teleprompter. That's not going to be good enough anymore. The campaign and Joe Biden has to change if he wants to resurrect his campaign. Because right now, I would say the most dangerous thing, as Brad was pointing out, is not just the base of the party, but the media narrative around his campaign. He can't withstand the next 2 weeks of being written out of this equation leading up to the most important event for Donald Trump, which is his coronation as the nominee of the party in Milwaukee at the convention in July. So at this stage, he has all the cards that are being dealt against him right now, and he's got to find a way to get back into the narrative. And the press narrative is really cruel right now. Major Democratic consultants like David Axelrod and Paul Begala are out there saying he should be thinking about getting out of this race. It's not the Rick Davises of the world. It's his own party questioning his capacity to wage a campaign.
We're, of course, continuing to pay attention to this campaign event in Raleigh, North Carolina. The First Lady, Jill Biden, just finished speaking. And part of her remarks, she was telling those assembled there in Raleigh, this election is about you. Joe is fighting for families here in North Carolina and across America who are working hard to find a secure place in the middle class, which points us to, Brad, that Joe Biden, even in his closing remarks at the very end of the debate, chose to talk about the economy, about inflation, about what he was doing to fight it. Does realistically any of that policy break through in a news cycle like this after a performance like that?
Well, no, because I think the media is going to focus on, the very evident and easy to talk about things on TV. That's the nature of the medium. And then again, the focus of now is the consolidation of the bases. And so that the message about what he's going to do for the next 4 years is targeted at the swing voters that will pay attention later in the cycle. And so I'm hopeful that they'll clip some of what he said, because again, the president did have several good moments last night where he was talking about defending his record, attacking Donald Trump, compared to Donald Trump's litany of lies that were bizarre at moments, and no one seems to be talking about his mental health capacity to be president, because I don't want that guy running the country for 4 years. So we look at, like, Joe Biden had some good moments, and so you can clip those and make sure the voters that weren't watching last night see some good elements of the debate there. And so, again, debates typically don't have a history of winning or losing an election. Particularly, we've never had a debate this far out. The president still has plenty of time to make his case to voters, and he's got to acknowledge the pain people are feeling with inflation and with the economy, show the progress he's made, and tell people how he's going to do more to bring down inflation and grow the middle class and bring housing prices down as well.
As we wait to hear from Joe Biden.
No plan to do that.
Yeah. Look, what do you tell Democrats then who are out on the ledge right now, Brad? Look no further than David Plouffe on MSNBC last night. He called it a DEFCON 1 moment coming off of that performance. Is he wrong?
Well, if Democrats are good at anything, we're good at freaking out over certain things. And so, by all means, I think this debate should be happening. I mean, it's natural as we head into the convention. There's, is this our nominee? Like, that's fine. But I think at the end of the day, they're going to find that when you look at President Biden's record, it is a solid Democratic record that any candidate would be proud to run on. And, thrusting this kind of chaos into the system at the last minute is what we've got to decide. Is the chaos worth kind of any momentum a challenger would get if it's a new nominee, or would it just make the party look chaotic compared to, Donald Trump, who is a chaotic individual to begin with? And you really want to roll the dice in that situation. These are the calculations you're going to have to make. But my money is that Joe Biden is going to be our nominee. Instead of freaking out about whether or not you're a nominee, let's accept that and show and take the fight to Donald Trump.
All right, Brad Howard and Rick Davis, our political panel today, will be sticking with us. President Biden has just taken the podium in Raleigh, North Carolina. Let's take a listen now to his remarks.
Thank you, North Carolina. I get in trouble with my mom looking down at heaven if I don't say, please excuse my back. I apologize. It's good knowing you have my back. Eric, thanks for that introduction. We had a wonderful time spending time with your sons, Kristen and Carter. They're going to grow up to be incredible young men. You would have been really impressed the way they talked about their dad, how informed they were about what was going on. I was truly impressed. And I ate 2 hamburgers. A special thanks to Roy and Kristen Cooper. Roy, you've been a great governor. Which makes it all the more important that North Carolina elected a great governor to replace you, Josh Stein. And when I'm reelected again with your help, I want you to know that I'm not promising not to take Roy away from North Carolina. Where they're coming out, I don't know. And thanks to all the state and local leaders here today, the great musicians and entertainers who performed earlier. Folks, let me tell you why I'm here in North Carolina. I'm here for one. North Carolina for one reason, because I intend to win this state in November. Are you going to see that? I think we are. And Roy's right. We win here, we win the election. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to stand up for the women of America. We're going to restore Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. We're going to stand up for the right to vote. We're going to stand up for Medicare and Social Security. We're going to fight for child care, paid leave, and elder care. We're going to keep lowering the cost of prescription drugs, not just for seniors, but for every single American. We're going to keep protecting the Affordable Care Act, which is why more than 40 million Americans have health insurance today. They didn't before. We're going to protect our children and get the weapons of war off our streets. We're going to provide clean drinking water, affordable high-speed internet, quality education for every child in America. We're going to secure our border and protect legal immigration. And unlike the other guy, we're going to stand up to dictators like Putin, because America bows to no one ever. Folks, and we're going to keep dealing with the climate crisis. Look, more than anything, we're going to preserve, protect, and defend our democracy. Because more than anything else, that is what is at stake in America this election. Your freedom, your democracy. America itself is at stake. Now, folks, I don't know what you did last night, but I spent 90 minutes on the stage debating a guy who has the morals of an alley cat. Did you see Trump last night? My guess, he said, I mean it sincerely, a new record for the most lies told in a single debate. He lied about the great economy he created. He lied about the pandemic he botched, killing millions of people. He closed businesses. He closed schools, losing their homes, people all over this country. America was flat on its back. So I told Trump that he was just one of two presidents in American history who left office with fewer jobs than he started. Herbert Hoover was the other one. That's why I call him Donald Herbert Hoover Trump. Then he lied about how great he was for veterans. But then I told him how he had called a veteran who had given their lives in the country in World War I and refused to go to the grave sites. He called them suckers and losers. He tried to deny it. But let me ask you, are you going to believe a 4-star Marine general, his own former Chief of Staff, John Kelly, who said he said that? Or a disgraced, defeated, and lying Donald Trump? My son was one of those people. Not in World War I, but in the Vietnam. Folks, look, how about the fact that 44 How about the fact, that's okay. How about the fact that 40 out of his 44 top advisors, including the vice president, aren't supporting him this time around? The people who know him best, 40 of them said, I will not support the man I work for this time around. It tells you a lot about the person who knows him. Look, he lied about how great he was on crime. I had to remind him that he oversaw a record increase in murder rates in 2020. On my watch, violent crime has hit a 50-year low. There's more to do with a 50-year low.
President Joe Biden speaking live in Raleigh, North Carolina this day after the first presidential debate. We wanted to let that breathe for a moment to see what he sounded like, hear the approach today, clearly not changing any plans with regard to this campaign, pledging his intention to win North Carolina, one of the 7 swing states that we've been tracking here at Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, alongside Kaylee Lyons here on the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power. Kaylee, that is the answer to what we saw last night, and calls in some cases from within his own party to exit this race and make room for someone else.
And the president there not shying away from the topic of that debate, though not specifically talking of his own performance, instead saying he spent 90 minutes on stage debating a guy with the morals of an alley cat. Of course, one of the lines he threw at Donald Trump over the course of the debate in Atlanta last night.
Interesting crowd there. Obviously, he's speaking to the tried and true. He was introduced by the governor, who he even suggested he might hire if he wins re-election. A crowd that was almost there to protect him. Kaylee, every time we heard somebody start shouting, potentially a heckler, the crowd would come right in with 4 more years. So this is an interesting moment for the president. Donald Trump, by the way, making his way to Virginia for an event with Governor Glenn Youngkin this day after the debate as we reassemble our panel now. Rick Davis is back with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist, joined by Democratic strategist Brad Howard, the founder of the Corcoran Street Group. Great to have you both with us. How did he do there based on what you just heard, Rick? It was almost like a different person.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he sounded stronger. And look, he's proven that he can read off a teleprompter. We talked about his last good performance.
Was that the difference maker, or having a crowd, or both?
Well, look, I mean, he just mentioned 3 occasions in the very first start of his speech where Trump misrepresented the facts of his administration or his positions, and he corrected them just now, where he was able to read off the teleprompter the statistics and the rationale behind it. He wasn't able to do that last night. Same issue, same statistics, same argument. Today he could read it. Yesterday he couldn't remember it. So I don't think he's proven much, right? Again, the bar can't be so low that he can show up and speak, and that somehow means it's a good event. He's going to have to prove that without that teleprompter, he can function in a political environment. And frankly, if I'd have been involved in the campaign, I would have made the argument, no teleprompter. Make him talk to the crowd, have a heartfelt conversation, and make a joke about last night. He didn't even address the fact that he had probably one of the worst debate performances in modern political history. You don't blow through something like this. You've got to create a narrative around it where you're sensitive enough to know what happened last night and are going to address it.
Well, as we came into last night, we were asking many questions about the extent to which voters were even going to be paying attention at a stage this early in the cycle where, as we've said repeatedly, neither of these candidates are officially their party's nominees yet. And yet, given the performance, everyone seems to now think the debate maybe did matter. But it does speak to the fact, Brad, that we still have months to go before voters actually have to make a decision in November. Months to go, even until the next time these two theoretically are going to be sharing a stage on September 10th. How much recovery can Joe Biden do with speeches and events like this in that time period, even if he is, to Rick's point, reading a teleprompter, not ad-libbing at a podium with Donald Trump next to him?
I'm actually kind of over this Republican BS about reliance upon a teleprompter. Barack Obama used a teleprompter in nearly every speech, and no one questioned his ability to maintain facts or remember stuff. The teleprompter makes your remarks concise, and it makes sure that what you're saying is accurate. When you look at Donald Trump, he uses a teleprompter, not as much as other people, but his speeches are hours long.
Okay, but Brad, would you not attribute some of the difference in delivery from the Joe Biden we saw on that stage in Atlanta last night to the Joe Biden we just heard in Raleigh as being in part because he was reading scripted remarks? If it's not that, what happened in the last 12 hours to have such a different president appear to speak?
When you're doing a debate, you're not just reading a speech, you're listening in real time, crafting an argument and responding. You couldn't have a teleprompter in that. It's a very different environment than when you're giving a speech in front of 10,000 people in person with 100,000 people watching. A teleprompter is good in that. I'd rather have a disciplined candidate who uses a teleprompter than one that meanders for 4 hours in a debate where he brings up sharks and Hannibal Lecter and washing machines without water. None of that makes sense. In a debate, yes, that's what was frustrating about the debate performance. A teleprompter, you can't use a teleprompter, so you can't really make that argument here. I think the frustration among Democrats is Donald Trump is such an easy target to go after, and the president failed to not only articulate his vision in that moment, but to really take it to Biden. We know he can do it. He has done it time and again. He beat Donald Trump in 2020. He took it to him in the State of the Union. We were hoping to see that kind of same fervor and focus, and we didn't see it. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be the nominee. It means he's got to now spend 2 weeks reassuring our concerns as base voters that he's the best guy to take it to Donald Trump in November.
Does part of that reassuring base voters include another debate, Brad. I wonder if what happened last night makes the second debate more likely because he wants to make up for it, or less likely because his staff wouldn't let him back on stage with Donald Trump.
Well, look, I think the Joe Biden that we all know and have seen for the last, 20, 30 years is a fighter. And I want to see more of Joe Biden. I think sometimes the protective detail around him prevents us from seeing the real Joe Biden. I think there was a criticism for Hillary Clinton as well. I think when you get Joe Biden out there, when he expresses empathy and emotion and laughter, and he gives that $1 million smile, and he's like engaging with people, that's his strength. And I want to see more of that. Absolutely, I do.
Of course, other Democrats, and Brad, you're included in this, are struggling with messaging today, or at least having a response as a member of the party to what went down last night. And many, including those on Capitol Hill, Joe, that we have seen responses from today, are still trying to defend President Biden. But interestingly, none of them really seem to be trying to spin the performance itself, but calling attention to Donald Trump, to the lies he told, to the alternative choice that exists, making it perhaps not so much about Joe Biden being up to the job as just Donald Trump not being up to the job. And you have to wonder how that
did someone win or did someone lose
lands. And Rick, I would love for you to weigh in on that. Is it enough to convince voters that Donald Trump shouldn't be president if you can't simultaneously convince them that you should instead?
Well, I do think it's a good development that the Democratic Party is actually trying to attack Donald Trump. I mean, we went 6 months in this campaign without the Biden campaign aggressively going after Donald Trump, allowing him to go into targeted states with rally after rally and doing exactly what Brad just described, making things up, talking about every issue in the context of how he sees the world, not how the world is. So that's a good thing. But the reality is, this is now not about Donald Trump. This campaign went from a referendum on Donald Trump because he wants it to be a referendum on Donald Trump to a referendum on Joe Biden's capacity to wage a campaign and be president. And that is a decidedly different campaign. And if you ignore it, you ignore it at your own peril. You have to address it like Joe Biden should have addressed it at this event. Maybe he will before the speech is over. But there's absolutely a solid rationale to get this out of the way now. Take your medicine, admit what went wrong, find a reason why. Why is it that he could not perform on stage last night? There needs to be some causality there. Did they give him some cold medicine right before he went up there and he was sleepy? I don't know, but the idea is this is what June and July is for. Get the cobwebs out. Nobody is really paying attention to this campaign. The Biden campaign forced people to pay attention by agreeing to the first ever early presidential debate, and then it blew up in their face. So they have to deal with that. It's something that they created, and now they have to deal with the aftermath of it. And if they don't, then it will still be an issue in September when people are really paying attention to this campaign.
All right, Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist, together today with Brad Howard, Democratic strategist and founder and president at the Corcoran Street Group, our wonderful political panel on this day after. Thank you so much for being with us. And it's worth pointing out as we consider the campaigns here, Joe, that when we talk about the Biden campaign, it actually is the Biden-Harris campaign. And it was the vice president who immediately after that debate had to go on CNN and acknowledge what she herself, in her own words, said was a slow start by the president. And there isn't an actual vice presidential part of Donald Trump's ticket at this time. He still has that hanging in the air as well.
You mentioned the reaction from many lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and we've been hearing from a lot of them. We're going to have one join us here in the studio coming up here. Haley Stevens, the Democrat from Michigan, an ally of Joe Biden, is going to join us for her take, which will be interesting to hear the framing from a lawmaker who's in the throes of this campaign cycle.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that conversation. It'll be coming up in just a few minutes. First, though, let's get a check on world and national news with Amy Morse in the 99.1 Newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. The Supreme Court has sided with a January 6th Capitol riot defendant in a ruling that could affect hundreds of prosecutions, including the criminal case in Washington against former President Donald Trump. Voting 6-3, the justices limited the Justice Department's use of a 2002 law, making it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding. A divided court threw out a decades-old legal doctrine that empowered federal regulators to interpret unclear laws issuing a blockbuster ruling that will constrain environmental, consumer, and financial watchdog agencies. The court overturned Chevron v. Natural Resources Defense Council, a 1984 ruling that Democratic administrations had used as a legal building block for new regulations. And the Supreme Court is expected to rule on former President Trump's immunity case on Monday. Chief Justice John Roberts today announced Monday will be the last decision day at the term. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 rally has hit a wall as tech mega caps whipsaw. Right now we got the S&P 500 index unchanged on the day. The Dow lower by 0.1%. Little change there. NASDAQ also little change, down less than 0.1%. We've got the 10-year now yielding 4.34% with a 2-year at 4.72%. Spot gold trading lower now by 3 cents, just about flat on the day, $23.27 for an ounce of the precious metal, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.2%, $81.58 right now for a barrel of WTI. Bottom line here, U.S. stocks struggling for direction as tech megacaps whipsaw in the final stretch of a banner quarter. S&P 500 index now unchanged on the day after an advance that almost reached 1% earlier in the session. NASDAQ 100 also losing steam after briefly surpassing the historic 20,000 mark. In the meantime, we've got shares of DJT, Trump Media and Technology. They are lower following last night's presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump, the latter coming away looking stronger. Also, the Hollywood Reporter is now reporting that the Biden-Trump debate drew 47.9 million viewers. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie, we do thank you. Welcome to the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg TV and radio. 48 million. How about it? We get the number, the ratings from the big debate last night. We just heard from Joe Biden a short time ago. He seems to be in full voice, and he's definitely staying in this race. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons as we pick through the pieces here. This day after the debate, and a fascinating, Kaylee, tweet from Dave Wasserman at the Cook Political Report. We hear from our friends at Cook pretty often. And he tweeted this while he was watching the debate, making it abundantly clear, he said, that Joe Biden's insistence on running for another term, when 66% of voters in our swing state poll believe it is likely he will not be able to finish a second term, has gravely jeopardized Democrats' prospects to defeat Donald Trump.
And yet Joe Biden, speaking moments ago at a rally in Raleigh, North Carolina, said that he intends to win North Carolina in November and win the election by extension. He also said he would not run again if he didn't believe he could do it. The question is that belief shared by the American electorate and by even members of his own party after the performance in the debate last night?
Yeah, this could be a temporary freakout, one that could be recovered from. We all remember the first debate for Barack Obama, but the stakes are a bit different. And the narrative surrounding Joe Biden's age is one that Barack Obama was not dealing with when he hit the stage with Mitt Romney.
Yeah, a very, very good point. And of course, Democrats today are having to speak about the president and what went down last night, speaking about the alternative and former President Donald Trump as well. And we are very lucky here on Balance of Power to be joined now in studio by Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan. Thank you for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio on this day after. Congresswoman, I think we can all call it like we saw it last night. It was a difficult night for the president. He just said he wouldn't be running if he didn't believe that he could win. But why would a voter watching what happened last night believe that he is capable of not just beating Donald Trump, but seeing out a second term to completion?
Well, he's the only one who has beaten Donald Trump and has debated him before and beaten him by 7 million votes last time. And look, I'm not going to try and sugarcoat last night. It wasn't the best performance. It was shaky. I would have loved to hear the president talk more forcefully about his record. He's the one defending a woman's right to choose. He's the one standing up for abortion access. I have seen him talk about these things very forcefully. He also got an infrastructure bill done. But what crystallized last night is that voters have had concerns about his age and about his fitness, and that now has called that back into question. I personally, as a lawmaker who I've done big policy alongside this president, I'm continuing to put my faith in him. He is in that big role to make decisions, and he has made a whole host of decisions very well, very effectively, and I'm going to continue to entrust him to do that and to speak clearly and honestly with the American people, as he has done many times before.
So this is something you see making its way through the convention, and Joe Biden is going to be the nominee obviously, in your eyes? Because a lot of people last night were talking about your governor, Governor Whitmer. Did you talk to the governor after the debate to get her impressions on how things went?
I talked to her a lot. I have not talked to her since the debate. I think she's fantastic. She has done a great job.
This whole idea of drafting her in a contested convention, though, is that crazy talk?
Well, look, George Packer talks about creative thinking to save democracy, and many Americans know that's what's on the line here. I mean, we have a former twice impeached convicted felon president who, again, couldn't denounce January 6th, wouldn't say that he would embrace the results of a free and fair election, doubled down on abortion bans, saying that the overturning of Roe was a great thing. And I know that Gretchen Whitmer is a fantastic surrogate for Joe Biden, and she has been standing alongside this administration and alongside him coming out of last night. I'm excited for her future. Again, that's her decision to make down the road in terms of what's going to happen and what's going to unfold over these next series of months. There's an amazing ground operation in Michigan around this Biden campaign. Dozens of field offices, sleeves rolled up, campaign staff, working hard, recruiting people for weekend events. Yes, last night was a tough night. I've worked on tough elections before, tough presidential elections. So we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves and continue to see this through.
But as you describe this as tough, and we have known even prior to tonight that this was likely to be a very close election decided by a very small group of voters, including in your state of Michigan, one of the critical swing states here. Would it be less tough? Would it be easier if the candidate wasn't Joe Biden? I guess my question is Joe Biden the only person in your eyes capable of beating Donald Trump, or could someone else do it just as easily?
Well, look, and I understand why you're asking me these questions, because that's your job, and certainly the hypotheticals, right? You know, it would have been nice if Donald Trump decided not to run again. It would have been nice if maybe another candidate could have beaten him in that major primary that he had. This man is back. He's told us he wants to be a dictator on day one. We've got a guy who has won before against Donald Trump overwhelmingly, has an incredible track record, has a strong vice president, who, by the way, right now is really shining. Listen to her on the national stage right now. Look at the track record. Look at the trustworthiness. And so, yeah, we could sit here and say, gosh, it would be great to have some, perfect hypothetical candidate coming out of the sun that's going to save us all. But that's not the system. And maybe we are in a moment of doing some deep thinking around reforms for our democracy. There's a lot of things that haven't been adjusted or changed. A lot of frustrations. We've got ballooning debt and deficit under a multitude of presidents. We've got a problem at our border. We've got, tight majorities that just pendulum swing between 5 seats here, 5 seats there. And yes, we have sometimes a frustratingly undemocratic process that gets us presidents of the United States. When you don't win the popular vote, but you win by 10,000 votes between, a handful of states, that feels frustrating to the American public.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate this conversation. I know you're not a spokesman for Joe Biden, but it's important to have this talk right now because people are trying to figure things out today.
Yeah.
And one of the big issues that you know a lot about, because it might mean more to Michigan than some other states, is the issue of tariffs. Joe Biden has his approach on this specifically when it comes to EVs. Speaking of Michigan, Donald Trump has a very different approach, and he got into this. It was one of the few moments of policy I might be able to point to from last night. Let's listen to Donald Trump from the debate.
It's just going to cause countries that have been ripping us off for years, like China and many others, in all fairness to China, it's going to just force them to pay us a lot of money, reduce our deficit tremendously, and give us a lot of power for other things.
Or will it do something else, like increase inflation at a time when we might be on the cusp of beating it?
Well, look, we know that President Trump's China policy was tariffs, and that did contribute to inflation. President Biden's approach has been aggressive public-private partnerships, industrial policy to the likes that this nation has never seen. You can look to the CHIPS and Science Act, the $52 billion that's been put into the marketplace by the federal government to say that we're going to start making chips here in the United States of America, that was met within the first quarter of its signing, Joe, with $200 billion of private sector contributions. These are things that are paying for themselves. We're also seeing this this with the energy transition, where our automotive industry is going, where ethanol is going, tax credits that are also working for us. I think President Biden did the right thing saying, hey, I'm putting tariffs down because I'm not letting cheap EVs flood our market. That's what's really frustrating with the Chinese Communist Party and how they do business.
Finally, as you speak to legislative accomplishments like the CHIPS Act, obviously we are deep in this election cycle. What can we expect from you and your colleagues between now and the election? Is anything robust actually going to be able to get across the finish line?
Well, you know, it's summertime and that senioritis is kicking in a little bit. You know, that itchiness to be home, be in your district, shaking hands. Okay, you know, the elections are in some ways closer than we think, but we do have a whole host of work to get done. And one of the bright lights is this AI task force that I'm sitting on. And we're meeting very regularly. We've gotten direction from both Republican leadership and Democratic leadership that we need to come forward with some ideas, that there's a real want to pass some legislation around AI, if it's looking at regulations or even more so protecting people's privacy, but also ensuring that we can bolster innovation and harness the good, dictate the rules of the road around artificial intelligence for our public health sector, for sciences, and for small businesses across America. So I'm remaining pretty dedicated to that activity.
This is an important conversation for us at Bloomberg, as you know. So come back not the day after a debate, and let's have a real talk about
we'll
AI.
talk about AI.
Yeah, and what you're going to get
They
done in the
didn't
lame
talk
duck
about
session.
AI
I think
last
that's going to be the biggest story of this Congress. Great to see you, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, with us at the table, a Democrat from Michigan. There you have it, Kaylee, from someone who's there and a Democrat who needs to make the case. On this Friday edition of Balance of Power, we turn to our colleague in New York for a final word on the broadcast today. That would be, of course, David Weston, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. And David, something tells me you were up watching that debate last evening as well. You used to run a news network. For those who aren't aware, David was the president of ABC News. Did you ever think you'd see something like that?
No, I have to say, there have been so many things that are historic, right? Whether it's presidents getting indicted and convicted or whatever, but one more for the history books. Although I must say, I thought it was a good format. Other people I know disagree with that. I thought it was contained and it was substantive and it was good. It didn't work out, as we've all been talking about, so well for the president, certainly as well as he would have hoped. But I actually thought CNN did a pretty good job.
Of course, for our audience on Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio, they're trying to figure out what the heck last night might mean for markets. Certainly you're seeing betting odds around this election change as they try to decipher whether or not it's more likely we're going to end up with the policies of Donald Trump once more relative to the status quo of Joe Biden. How would Wall Street view this, David?
Well, that's the question. We keep asking everybody that. We asked Roger Altman that from Evercore. We actually talked to him before the debate, so we talked to him mainly about the competing economic policies of Donald Trump and Joe Biden and how they differed and why, given that the economy is as strong as it is from so many different measures, why it is that people don't seem to be more enthusiastic for President Biden. This is part of what he had to say.
Voters are queasy or sour about the economy, and at the moment, rating Trump more highly than President Biden on the economy. And why is that? And I think the answer is this much discussed topic of affordability, where it is true that grocery prices, gasoline prices, shelter costs have all risen in the low 20% range since President Biden took office. And I'm talking about absolute levels of increase. In other words, grocery prices in general are about 21% higher today than they were when President Biden took office. And voters are unhappy about that. Now, fortunately for President Biden, we're seeing some better news on that.
Yeah, so that was Roger Altman of Evercore talking about that, and that was as of a day or two ago. Unfortunately, perhaps for President Biden, I think he's got more than one job in the remaining 4+ months here to really come across the voters. It's not just persuading them that the prices are coming down, but maybe persuading them that he really is up to the job.
Some interesting movers here. I know we're out of time, David. You look at solar stocks down, China-sensitive stocks, Starbucks down today. Is Wall Street already starting to gird for another Trump term, do we think, after last night?
Yeah, I think they've been doing it already, but I think this certainly it underlined the need for it. So that would be my speculation of what's going on. That sounds right, Joe.
Well, we always look forward to the conversation, David. It's great to see you again. Bloomberg Wall Street Week, 6 p.m. Wall Street time here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Of course, we should also point out that on this day, it is the last day of the quarter, which may be influencing markets as well. It also is the second to last day of the Supreme Court's term. We're going to get the immunity decision regarding Donald Trump on Monday. After today, they ruled in favor of January 6 defendants going against the Enron doctrine. They also overturned the Chevron doctrine. We'll break down more the cases from the Supreme Court on the late edition of Balance of Power today. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Connection lost.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. Let's get to the setup on this It's Friday, June 28th, 2024, and it's the last trading day of June. We're going to wrap up the month, the second quarter, and the first half of 2024.
Yeah, with the S&P 500 hitting 5,500 and a new record, the NASDAQ 100 briefly surpassing the historic 20,000 mark before it all hit a wall. More on that in just a moment.
Yeah, interesting trade, no doubt about it. And yet, we are going to tackle that why stocks will probably continue to rise until they fall off a cliff, essentially. And that's according to our Markets Live blog team. We're going to get into that in just a moment.
Plus, I don't have to tell you if you're paying any attention. The first presidential debate is over. The big question, though, is about whether President Joe Biden's candidacy could continue or should continue. We'll do a roundtable with that in just a minute.
Also, not a lot of debate about the U.S. economy last night. There was some, to be fair. They talked about it, but we are definitely on it on this Friday. That is, we got the Fed's preferred measure of underlying U.S. inflation today. It decelerated, so Fed cut a sure thing. That's something we're going to ask our team. First up, though, let's get an update on the trade. We're definitely off our highs of the session. Over to Charlie Pellet. We go.
Thank you very much, Carol. Not just off the highs, lower across the board right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. S&P down 2 points, 54.80. Tim told us we were above 5,500. Yes, briefly, 54.80 right now, down 0.1%. Dow lower by 68, drop there of 0.2%. 39,093 on the Dow Industrials right now, while NASDAQ is down 17, a decline right now of just about 0.1%. We got the NASDAQ 100 index holding on to a gain, barely up less than 0.1%, higher now by 4 points. 10-year 4.34%, the 2-year 4.71%. Gold, little change, just about flat on the day, 23.62 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 81.51 for a barrel of WTI. Bottom line here, Wall Street's enthusiasm fading in the final stretch of a solid quarter for stocks. One major standout today to the downside, Nike, stock plunging 20.3% after the world's largest sportswear company's full-year outlook missed expectations. Also, keeping an eye on Apple shares, Apple today down 0.1%. iPhone shipments in China rose 40% in May. The stock right now is down again, Apple trading lower by 0.1%. Recapping red on the screen as we wrap up the quarter, I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, our most read story on the Bloomberg this Friday is about last night's debate. President Joe Biden bet that a debate with Republican and former President Donald Trump would boost his moribund re-election campaign. Tim, his gamble, though, many would say, has failed.
Yeah, we continue Bloomberg's coverage of last night's debate. Here with us is Bloomberg Radio and TV political news director Jody Schneider in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Also with us, Bloomberg Opinion West Coast politics and policy columnist Erica D. Smith in Los Angeles. Jody, let's start with you. Carol did a really scientific, or not so scientific, poll on the website formerly known as X, asking people if they were voting today. Carol, what were the results of that?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up. So I asked if you were voting today. Biden got 50%. Trump got 31% and undecided got 19%. People might be surprised by that. No standard deviations yet. Like we said, not very scientific.
Or ever, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, we all watched the debate last night, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into President Biden's performance in a moment. I know everybody's focusing on that. Simply, though, and maybe this is naive in our question, is there a winner, is there a loser from last night? A clear winner, clear loser?
Well, I think if you're looking at performance, Joe Biden clearly lost. He seemed lost at times. He had, first of all, his voice was odd. They told us that he had a cold, but they didn't kind of tell us that beforehand. So when your first impression of Joe Biden, a question or so in, was, what's going on here? His voice was bad. He seemed to be faltering. He was really put on the ropes early on by Donald Trump and stayed there, frankly. So in terms of performance, Donald Trump was clearly the winner. Now, in terms of policy issues, first of all, there wasn't a lot of policy debate. They were each going on kind of in their own way. But Donald Trump, continued a lot of misstatements, lies, attacks, sort of ungrounded attacks. So from that standpoint, you're watching it, you don't exactly feel good about the grasp of the issues there. Mm-hmm. But he did have a much stronger performance than President Biden. And interestingly, President Biden today on a campaign event seemed robust. So very, very odd performance last night.
Okay, go ahead, Carol.
No, well, let's just go there for a moment, because we were just watching too where he was in, I think it was Raleigh, North Carolina, and it seemed much more like the President Biden of the State of the Union. What gives? How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the question of the day, I think. One thing is he did have a teleprompter in Raleigh at that campaign event. He didn't last night, which is interesting. There was no audience last night, which everyone seemed to think was going to benefit the president rather than the former President Trump, because Trump loves the crowd, right? But it really seemed to hurt President Biden.
Okay, so let's look at a couple key aspects from last night's debate. Jody, here's CNN's Dana Bash and Donald Trump at last night's CNN presidential debate on Trump, whether or not he'd accept the next election outcome in November. Check it out.
The question was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these. But the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week.
Okay, Jody, not exactly a yes or a no answer there. I'm curious if Trump's reticence is going to alienate people, or perhaps alienate swing voters. I mean, they can think of January 6th, just 4 years ago, and the way the president at the time responded to the 2020 election.
Yeah, I think if something was going to hurt him with swing state voters, it would be that, Tim. He not only did he not answer yes or no, he made up things, saying it was not a free and fair election. Every single court seemed to, said that, right? He would not be, Joe Biden wouldn't be standing there if this was something that was litigated. It wasn't. So not accepting the, legal outcome of an election, I think, is something that does disturb swing state voters, and it's that kind of answer that gives them pause.
All right, and let's get to something that you certainly talked about before, Jody, and was disturbing to a lot of folks who were watching, and what many would say was a key concern for Democrats, and that is President Biden's performance last night. Here he is at the CNN presidential debate.
Making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
All right, that, of course, was President Biden at the debate last night. I want to bring in Erica D. Smith, West Coast politics and policy columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, because, Erica, you write that of the many prominent Democrats with aspirations for higher office, California Gavin Newsom is arguably the best equipped to pick up the baton from President Biden. We wouldn't have had this conversation necessarily 24 hours ago, but because of the performance last night, we are having this conversation. How is Governor Newsom the right person to maybe pick up that baton?
Yeah, I agree. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And I actually don't think that Governor Newsom actually wants to have this conversation either right now. But, he has been, a lot of people have thought that he's been kind of running the shadow campaign for several months now, particularly people in California who are voters of his. He's been traveling the country, traveling the world, building his national profile. He has, socked a lot of his campaign cash into helping Democrats in other states, networking. Obviously, he's a top surrogate for Joe Biden and has been on the campaign trail almost nonstop for several months. He's emerged as probably one of his best surrogates because he's really nimble in debates, and he goes on Fox News and on the right-wing media without hesitation. We all remember the debate that he did last year with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis when DeSantis was still a presidential candidate for Republicans. And, he got a lot of applause for that, though it was, I don't know if much policy came out of that debate either. But he is really surfaced as somebody who's kind of ready to kind of take into that next step as a backup. And so now we're having this discussion.
Why Gavin Newsom over Vice President Kamala Harris, also from California, and also another California politician, Erica?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the two, candidates I think most people are going to be talking about. Obviously, Kamala Harris, because she's the vice president. And as I write in my column, I mean, Vice President Harris is more than capable, I think, of taking over this job if necessary, and running at the top of the ticket if that's what voters want. I think her biggest problem is her polling. You can argue about why people don't like her as much as, the various different reasons, what it, has to do with sexism or racism or what. But, her polling numbers have never been that great. And I think that, Gavin Newsom probably is going to do better with voters right now than Vice President Harris.
Well, Jody, give us the view from Washington, D.C. on this. I'm curious if Gavin Newsom, in your opinion, in your view, and given in the circles that you report from, has what it takes nationally to have that national appeal. Certainly well known in California, but is he known well enough nationally?
Yeah, I think he's well known, Tim. I think the question is a Californian. Is that who's going to kind of be able to take on Donald Trump if Joe Biden were to step away? There's a lot of Monday morning, I guess Friday morning quarterbacking here today, and a lot of people are talking. You hear Gretchen Whitmer's name out there from Michigan. You hear Wes Moore from Maryland, who's only been in office a couple of years. We're hearing a lot of names. And of course, Gavin Newsom's name comes out. He has been, out there on the national stage. But I think at this point, it's still just kind of a parlor game. But we are hearing some prominent Democrats and some people who had worked with, certainly for Obama's campaign, some even on early Biden campaigns, who are questioning whether the president should step aside for someone. But there really has to be a conversation that Joe Biden accepts. And that seems to be, certainly from his campaign performance today, for his, at that rally, he does not want to step aside. So until that happens, kind of the parlor game is just a parlor game.
Erica, for those who are listening and watching right now on Bloomberg Radio and TV and across our platforms, I mean, you understand California politics, you understand Governor Newsom for our national and really global audiences, because Bloomberg has put out some reports about around the world how people watched political leaders, global leaders, watch that debate very closely and are nervous. What do they need to know and understand about Gavin Newsom? Because he's been playing, too, on the international stage.
Oh, yeah, he has. I mean, he is a big thinker. I mean, I know he kind of comes across as kind of this, he has this Hollywood kind of stereotype, but he's really a policy wonk, and he knows his stuff. He is very charismatic, I think is pretty clear from all the interviews that he's done. But I do think he has a really good mind for policy and for politics. He's managed to get himself out of jams that I think would have, taken other politicians out here in California. But to the broader point about California, right? I mean, California is so far left on the political spectrum that it's hard for I think a lot of Americans to understand California at all, much less California politics. And I think that's going to be his challenge. He's a very likable person. He can move around in different crowds and different groups of people. The question is whether or not that will, fly, if it even comes to that again, if Biden actually decides to step aside, which there's a lot of ifs that get to get through before we get to whether Gavin Newsom's going to potentially run for president.
Well, Erica, again, it is a parlor game, but we are playing it today, and you do have a column that is among the most read, all about potentially stepping in. So I'm gonna continue with my line of questioning to you about this, because I am wondering about the California element, whether it helps or hurts Gavin Newsom. You mentioned it's a liberal state, however, it does have an incredibly huge economy, among the biggest economies in the entire world. But the view of California, and I can say this as a Californian, what is outside of California is, I think, for a lot of people very confusing. Perhaps they see problems with crime in Los Angeles and San Francisco. They see reports of people moving to less expensive states like Arizona and Texas. They hear about the high cost of living in the state. Does it help or hurt a potential presidential candidate from the state?
I think on the most basic level, I think it hurts because people see those headlines and they think, California's a mess. I think there's a story to be told about how California grapples with those issues and about how oftentimes those issues don't stay contained to California, but the California is the first one to experience them. And I think of when we think about homelessness in particular, I mean, California's had a homelessness problem for quite some time, but we've seen that as a problem spread to cities all over the country, big and small. And people are now looking to California about how do you actually deal with this problem? What should we do? And so I think there's a story to be told about, the mess that is California. But I think there's also a story to be told about how we deal with it. And then there's just the broader story of innovation, right? Gavin Newsom gave his State of the State address much later than usually planned, but he did it online. And it was very kind of national sweep, kind of putting California as this the face of liberalism, or the model of liberalism and democracy in the face of, MAGA republicanism, and how we embrace equity and all of these things that, he's gone on and stumped about. And so I think there are a lot of things that Democrats in this country want our country to be, and to be more accepting and to be more open and inclusive. And I think California does represent that, but there's some mess to get through before you understand what that actually looks like.
And I got to say, when it comes to Governor Newsom, I just go back to COVID. I mean, that was one of the big voices that, it wasn't just a California governor, but on a national scale, I feel like the nation was watching what he was doing and what he was saying in a big way, having covered that day in, day out. Jody, come on back in. I want to know what you are hearing, though, specifically from the Democratic power brokers, from the big fundraisers that have been backing President Biden, what they need to what they want to happen next. Are they pushing for change? Are they pushing for him to step down?
Well, I think there's a lot of conversations going on at different levels, and one of them is where to put your money. And one thing I think hasn't gotten so much attention yet, and certainly something we're hearing a lot today, is the so-called down ballot candidates, Democrats in the House and the Senate, where the Democrats could very well win the House this year, and Hakeem Jeffries could become the Speaker of the House, and who very much wants to be the Speaker of the House. So I think there's a lot of concern there that they not be dragged down, that if the ticket, that if Biden at the top of the ticket is not as, is going to have issues and going to have increasing issues, that they don't want that to reflect on them. Same thing with Senate candidates. So I think there is a fair amount of concern there. And frankly, we may see some donors, if they decide they don't really want to back Biden, they could go to back House and Senate candidates instead. I think that's something we're going to have to see with the money, where the money flows in coming weeks. Both campaigns, both Trump's and Biden's campaigns, have said they had very good fundraising hauls last night with the debate.
Okay, so Jody, what's the next focal point for you if we think about the roadmap to November? We see President Biden in North Carolina today, President Trump, I saw a video of him hitting the links and making some comments after making a drive. What's your focal point?
And great if you could do it in 30, because we'd love to get Erica's view on that as well. Go ahead, Jody.
Well, first of all, in 2 weeks, we have a sentencing on the 11th of former President Trump in New York on the 34 counts of which he was found guilty. And then we have the RNC convention in Milwaukee just days later. So those will be big moments for the former president. And of course, we have the Democratic convention in August for President Biden.
All right, save 30 seconds for you, Erica, as well. What's the next thing on your focal point or on your radar?
Yeah, I'm looking at the down ballot races. Obviously, Arizona and Nevada are big swing states. There's a primary, not presidential primary, but there's a primary coming up in Arizona at the end of July. Obviously, looking at the RNC and what happens in court for Donald Trump. But also, there's a Supreme Court ruling hanging out there about immunity, which hasn't landed yet, which I guess will land on Monday. So there's a lot of different ways this could go. So just trying to keep up.
And we're only halfway through 2024. All right, guys, thank you so much. Bloomberg Radio and TV political news director Jody Schneider in our D.C. bureau, and on the West Coast, Bloomberg Opinion, West Coast politics and policy columnist Erica D. Smith. Coming up, we did talk a little bit or heard a little bit about the U.S. economy. We're going to focus on it, though, big time. A little bit, but we're going to do some more. All you need to know, especially about that important Fed inflation print.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Little change for the U.S. equity market as we wrap up the first half of the year. We do, however, have the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all trading in the red right now. S&P down 2 points. Little change there. 54.80, a drop of just under 0.1%. We were above 5,500 earlier in the session. The Dow right now down 77, decline of 0.2%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 13, drop there of 0.1%. 10-year yield, 4.33%, with a 2-year, 4.71%. Spot gold, a little changed, up 28 cents the ounce to $23.28. And West Texas Intermediate crude, 81.63 a barrel, down now by 0.1%. We'll have more on the markets and the day's economic outlook, economic news from Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith and Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie coming up in just a moment. Briefly, Trump Media and Technology Group shares surged and then retreated following last night's presidential debate. Shares of DJT, that is the ticker, now lower by 7.6%. On one other business note, Basic Fun, which is a seller of children's products, including Lincoln Logs and Tinker Toys, has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, that kind of breaks my heart.
Love Lincoln Logs.
I know, right? Like one of those just great old standard toys. My brothers had them. I don't know. All right. We have to move on because Charlie did set us up really well, because one of the focal points, certainly, we've been talking about it all week, has to do with the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, the measure of underlying U.S. inflation decelerating in the month of May, bolstering the case for lower interest rates later on this year.
At the same time, household spending rebounded after a pullback in April, and income showed solid growth, offering some hope that price pressures can be tamed without lasting damage to consumers.
All right, so let's get to it. Our economics and rates roundtable. Back with us, Molly Smith, Bloomberg News economics editor, and Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie, both here in our studio. All right, Molly, first up, the data, the inflation print, the data confirms essentially what? That it's easing.
Correct. Yes.
Good stuff.
Good news.
We're
yes.
not surprised, right? We knew a lot of the components that go into this.
Correct. Yes. So we knew, we had a strong feeling that 0.1 monthly increase in the core was coming. So that came in as expected. And then, for all of our fans who like to look at it out to 2 decimal places, it was actually a 0.08 increase. So looking at it on the unrounded basis, that's the smallest rise since late 2020. So that's definitely a great sign as well. And also looking at the spending data, this was encouraging in the sense that services spending really slowed down in the month. This has been the part of spending that has kept inflation so elevated that if we are going to hopefully see some more slowing in services spending, that's hopefully going to translate into the stickiest part of inflation ebbing as well.
Any surprises whatsoever? I mean, everything was pretty much
I was surprised to see the savings rate go up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
just because you hear about excess savings being
depleted.
Yeah.
Right. And that people are, you're stretching more for like where you're going to find money to support spending. So to see the savings rate go up, I was surprised by that. And also to see inflation adjusted disposable income rise by the most since early last year. That was certainly surprising. I feel like I struggle with this a lot to know, and we talk about it a lot on this show too, what is the truest measure of the labor market right now? There's so many mixed signals. Wages especially, I really struggle with that one. There's so many different metrics of what is going on with earnings growth, and this one, I feel like, whether you're going to take signal from this report within the PCE, we get average hourly earnings next week. You have also the employment cost index that's quarterly.
Right.
There's so many different measures out there to describe the state of wage growth, and they can be conflicting at times.
This is why it makes it tricky. Speaking of maybe a little bit of a conflict, I don't know, it feels like rates have moved around a little bit today, Michael. So walk us through in terms of the reaction off of the inflation print.
Well, Carol, the inflation data was as expected, and that's a relief. And we saw a bit of a bump up here in Treasury prices, so yields dropped.
Yeah.
And then we've just gradually unwound that. And I think what's interesting now is we've got higher yields led by the 30-year and 10-year, and that's called what we call the bear steepener. And the bear steepener, I think, has probably more to do with what happened last night in the debate, because you saw Trump doing very well, and the market now thinking, okay, this has put the election on the radar here firmly, and what we're hearing from Trump is likes tax cuts, wants to keep spending. So you start to think about down the road, you want to be in a curve steepener, you want to be selling the back end, those longer dated rates, because the deficit situation is still going to be a problem coming down the road.
interesting. So
that makes sense.
It's also month end and quarter end today too.
Yeah.
So I do feel the market kind of bought enough treasuries earlier this week. We had 3 auctions, for example. So it's just really about, it's a messy day. It's the last day of the month, last day of the quarter. So, but the reaction, if you look at it straight line after what happened last night, you can go, people want to put a steeper on.
But not a big reaction, though.
Not a big reaction. We're still very much within the recent ranges. We're
So
still
it's not
towards,
like a reset or
it's not a reset.
change of how.
No, and in fact, if you look at the odds for a September rate cut, they're still around about 65, 68%. We're still pricing in a little less than 50 basis points or half a percentage point of cuts for this year. So the market's still very much in line with the Fed. September's in play. And as Molly, mentioned earlier, we got the big employment report coming out a week today. That's going to be the next big piece of sort of data that the market will be looking
But
for.
of course, if that's coming out coincidentally July 5th, I mean, I personally actually won't be here, so nice for me, but I'm sure, Tim, you will be here.
I will be here.
Of course, there's
With bells
news.
on.
Got to be here for the news. And I found that day off without even realizing the jobs report was coming out. So who knows? Maybe that's, again, poor on my fault. But maybe, I mean, look, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people away from their desks, and who knows what kind of choppy trading activity you might get on some lighter volume, presumably, that day.
Hey, Michael, I do want to go back to an election question here, because you talk to bond traders every day, and I'm wondering how they're thinking about the Fed if the former president wins election in November, and he's talked openly about his desire for lower interest rates, even when he was president, and also we saw that Wall Street Journal report a few months ago about the idea of being more involved in policymaking with the Federal Reserve during a Trump administration.
It's certainly a topic that myself and my colleague Liz McCormack have been asking a lot of investors recently. And the general view has been, you can't rule out something different happening here. But everyone we've spoken to make the point, the Fed is an independent institution. It has a lot of backing across party divides in Congress. You only have to see some of the recent appearances of Powell in front of the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. People on both sides of the aisle have made it very clear to Powell, we thank you for being independent, focusing on the economy. I think there's a lot of credibility with the Fed, and I think ultimately it's very hard to see how a president can really bully this Fed.
You want to roil global markets, right?
Well,
Start
you will.
making a
No.
Fed making it not independent, right?
And actually, as some people said to me, you can see a scenario where the Fed actually ends up having to be the voice of reason and make some big stand. And I think actually, in the end of the day, you're getting inflation down. You are going to ease policy if unemployment starts to rise. That's the Fed's job. They know that. I'm sure Molly's got some good views on this as well, but that's the feedback we've got from bond investors.
Yeah, Mary Daly was speaking about that today as well, that take a look at the PCE report this morning. She was speaking after it came out that this is a great example that policy is working. I think the counterpoint to that, though, when she was saying that, inflation is coming down, that the jobs market's cooling, spending is cooling, and that's all evident of policy working, I think a lot of that you could also just say that we are coming from extremely high levels of all of these measures, and inevitably they had to come down whether interest rates were higher or not. Just the sheer fact that inflation has persisted has also led to a lot of these indicators starting to weaken. So, I don't know, just a little counterpoint there that I don't know that necessarily this is all the work of monetary policy.
I also do wonder, Mohammed El-Arian, Michael, in your story, continues to be concerned about a Fed policy mistake. I mean, does the data, first let me ask you, Molly, based on the data that you continue to see, does it feel like the Fed is behind?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that, look, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I've said it here so many times, but the first 3 months of the year certainly did not support the Fed to start cutting rates any sooner. That was when you look for what's it one's a print, two's a party, three's a trend, or whatever we said. That was certainly they said we have to take signal from this, and they did. And now we're finally starting to see maybe some more prints come in line to show that inflation has resumed its downward path. Jobs market has very, very gradually slowed. Still hard to really say that it's really cracking in any meaningful way. So, no, I don't think that they're behind. But then, of course, you have people who say that policy acts with long and variable lags. So that the worst may be yet to come.
So over to you, Michael.
Well, I think the Fed is looking pretty good here because this week we saw in Australia and Canada inflation kicking back up, and Canada recently cut rates. So it puts a spotlight on central banks that have jumped early, including the ECB, whereas the Fed has said, no, we want to be sure. Now, with PCE running at an annual rate of 2.6%, we're getting into that zone that Rich Clarida talked about last year, when he said, when is this Fed going to feel comfortable? What level of PCE do we need to see? And
especially if there's still lags, right?
Yes.
In the policy.
And so
debatable how long and variable they are.
It is.
Yes.
So the question, we've yet to hear from this Fed or from Powell, what is the sort of playbook here? At what point do you start to look at easing? I guess they're waiting to see how long employment can stay in shape here. And that will, I think, shape the second half of this year. Now, the thing about the Fed being behind the curve, you could argue basically pretty much central banks are always behind the curve. And this is a central bank that has raised rates to 5.25%, 5.5%. They can definitely take the elevator down and cut rates if they have to. And that's a good insurance policy to have if you're a central bank.
They can be more aggressive if they need to, right? They've got a lot of room to play around.
Exactly.
But to your point, they certainly have to be feeling better than, like you said, in Canada,
I think so, yeah.
in Australia right now, that they're looking at, oh God, like, do we need to go back
almost
the
like
other
their
way?
teams are like, see what happens, see what happens over there.
And the ECB probably breathing a sigh of relief today that French and Spanish inflation came down a bit. And it's like, whew, okay, maybe like it's going to be okay. Just keep cutting.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Great setup as we head into the weekend. Molly Smith, Bloomberg News economics editor, and Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie. Guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's still to come. Yes, more records on stocks today. Well, we did see a little bit of a pullback, and yet talk of them falling off a cliff. We're going to explain when we come back right here on Bloomberg Business Week. Before we do that, though, let's head to Washington, D.C., because that's where we find Amy Morris for an update